Government Business Order of the Day number 1, standing in the name of Ms Boothby, the Anti-Discrimination Amendment Bill 2025, Serial 28, to move the bill be now read a second time.
Member for 𝙏𝙎𝙎.
Thank you.
Oh, do I have to move the bill, Madam Speaker?
Oh. Sorry.
Do I just have to move the bill?
Just leave it with me for 2 seconds while I...
Yeah.
Minister. Attorney General, my apologies.
Madam Speaker, I move the bill now be read a second time.
I call the next member to speak in the debate. Member for 𝙏𝙎𝙎.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to speak in the strongest possible terms against the CLP government's Anti-Discrimination Amendment Bill. Let us be clear. This bill does not promote fairness, it does not promote equality, it does not promote inclusion. What this bill does, Madam Speaker, is strip Territorians of hard-won protections, roll back decades of progress and throw years and years of community engagement and consultation, and sends a dangerous message that discrimination is welcome in the Northern Territory. The CLP thinks this is a good idea. Madam Speaker, when the former Labor government introduced the current anti-discrimination bill, you posed the question, why is the government doing this? I replied with, because we believe in fairness, equity, equality and inclusion. We believe that Territorians deserve anti-discrimination legislation that meets the needs of our community. Equal treatment, equal opportunity for all Territorians is what Labor believes in. A territory where every person, no matter who you are, is afforded equality and the opportunity and equality before the law. Madam Speaker, this bill before the House today undoes all of that. The amendment bill, which was introduced and passed and will be passed by this CLP government, removes protections against conduct that offends, insults, humiliates or intimidates, and replaces them with a narrow test of inciting hatred, serious contempt or severe ridicule. Madam Speaker, this test is so narrow and so vague that the Attorney-General herself in estimates could not give a clear example of who this amendment is protecting. Does the Attorney-General know what this amendment means in practice? Does the government know? Madam Speaker, in this case, it is not clear from those across from me that it understands what it means. It means that Territorians must endure abuse, endure slurs, endure vilification, endure humiliation, until it crosses an extreme threshold. The bar will be set at such a high degree, Madam Speaker, that it will be easy to subject Territorians to discrimination, to intimidation, to humiliation, harassment, without recourse or protection from this behaviour. Madam Speaker, now that this CLP government is rolling back the former Labor government's anti-discrimination laws, laws that took decades to build and were considered a nation-leading blueprint of what a modern, diverse and inclusive anti-discrimination legislation should look like. I can't help but echo the question you asked the former Labor government. Why is the government doing this? Madam Speaker, we are seeing a world where hate speech is rising and every other jurisdiction in this country is strengthening their laws to offer their people protections against increasingly divisive speech and activity in the community. And this government, which consists of multicultural members, some who are immigrants, are removing laws and protections that will keep them safe from vilification and discrimination. I ask another question, Madam Speaker. Who is this legislation for? The government cannot pinpoint to a single freedom curtailed under the current law. Not one. So I repeat, who is this legislation for, and who is it being done, and who is not being protected by the current law? This amendment is not about protecting or restoring a way of life for Territorians. It is legislative abandonment, a slap in the face to the Territory's greatest strength, its diversity, inclusivity and equality. By changing this Act, the CLP are telling us they are not interested in upholding their ethical duty to protect Territorians from harm. In fact, it is the opposite. They are showing us that their lack of commitment to building a safer and more inclusive community. It is unethical to remove protections from vulnerable populations. 2 years ago, the former Labor government delivered the most comprehensive anti-discrimination protections in Australia. Since that time, there have been no adverse consequences that would warrant these amendments. The sky has not fallen in since that legislation changed. The CLP, disrespecting their responsibility to govern properly, disrespecting Territorians and wasting everyone's time by attempting to fix something that is not broken. This is an exercise that will simply water down hard-won protections, weaken legislation and open the floodgates to hate speech. The CLP thinks it's acceptable to discriminate against our Aboriginal Territorians, our rainbow communities, our multicultural communities, and our Territorians living with a disability. Not to mention our survivors of domestic and family violence. The CLP's handling of this amendment bill has been in absolute shambles from the beginning. Since its introduction, they have been unable to clearly explain to Territorians why they are doing this. From the get-go, Madam Speaker, the CLP have butchered the amendment process by telling the community one thing and pursuing another. The absolute lack of proper, genuine, meaningful consultation with the community and with Territorians who will be affected by these changes is a disgrace. The CLP have failed to listen to experts. They have failed to listen to those with lived experience. Territorians deserve better than this. They deserve a government who will act in the interests of all Territorians and in the best interests of Territorians, not a government that compromises protections designed to safeguard them. The utter failure of the CLP government to consult on this bill is shameful. The decision to wind back anti-discrimination protections unnecessarily is shameful. It is categorically false to suggest that the current anti-discrimination laws curtail freedom of speech. That is a lie. These amendments put us out of step with the Commonwealth Racial Discrimination Act, undermining the very purpose of anti-discrimination law, equality and opportunity for all. The CLP, Madam Speaker, are choosing to back in those who want to denigrate, marginalise and abuse Territorians, rather than protect our diverse populations. These archaic amendments will exacerbate social inequalities and contribute to discrimination. At its best, the CLP decision today to amend the Anti-Discrimination Act is politics designed to divide. Madam Speaker, Territory Labor believes religious schools have the right to uphold, to teach and enshrine their religious beliefs and values. We are concerned that discriminating against a potential employee, even cleaners and gardeners, on religious grounds is an unnecessary step. These amendments give faith-based schools the legal right to turn away any Territorian who does not share their religion, not just teachers, but gardeners, cleaners and receptionists. In many small communities, Madam Speaker, where the only school is a faith-based school, this will slam the door shut on jobs and opportunities. jobs and opportunities for even local Aboriginal people turned away from the only school in their community. Madam Speaker, from the CLP's announcement of their plan to amend the anti-discrimination laws, the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, our hard-working unions and the community groups tell us these amendments are carve-outs, which strip away rights and undermine the very purpose of the anti-discrimination law. Madam Speaker, Sally Sievers, the CEO of the Northern Territory Council of Social Services, stated that these changes will leave Territorians less safe. We need to protect what we've built together. Finding workforce in the Territory is hard enough. Why would we reintroduce legislation that could restrict the pool of workers even further? Scott Cowan from the Australian Services Union stated, "It is entirely hypocritical for the Northern Territory government to, on one hand, say it wants to take steps to improve community safety while simultaneously using its power to remove legal protections for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. These amendments leave the door wide open for covert discrimination against 𝙏𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙑 plus SB Territorians and others who are already vulnerable, like those living with a disability, who receive high levels of discrimination in the Northern Territory already. The CLP's amendments are regressive, are unnecessary, are unethical and misleading at a time when hate speech is on the rise and every other jurisdiction is strengthening the laws to safeguard against increasingly divisive speech and activity in our community. The Territory is strongest when it is inclusive, when it protects the vulnerable, when it values diversity. This bill takes us backwards. It weakens protections, legitimises prejudice, and tells Territorians that they must tolerate discrimination. Our communities are asking for leadership on safety, on cost of living, on jobs, on housing, on health, on maternity services. This government has chosen instead to drag us backwards into a culture war. Madam Speaker, when will the CLP stop playing games and scapegoating our vulnerable groups to suit their agenda? There is no place in the community for anti-Semitism, for Islamophobia, for racism, for transphobia, for ageism, for sexism, and any other divisive and frankly disgusting rhetoric. This government is showing us that at time and time again, they do not respect Territorians. They do not understand. They think they know better than those who have the lived experience. The CLP think that they are experts. And this political smokescreen, the amendment bill today, demonstrates just this. Madam Speaker, Territory Labor will not stand for this. The Territory Labor opposition stands for strong, safe and inclusive communities. A Territory that backs one another. A Territory that stands up to protect vulnerable people from harm. That supports equality, respect and human dignity. Madam Speaker, Territorians deserve better than what is being put forward to us today. Madam Speaker, this is a backward step and we should not be supporting this bill. Madam Speaker, almost 2 years ago to the day, this very Parliament passed Australia's most comprehensive anti-discrimination laws in the country, seen as a gold star for protections in this country, a moment many were incredibly proud of. A contemporary piece of legislation that stood up for every Territorian. A piece of legislation that said there is no room for hate, there is no room for discrimination. A piece of legislation that protected our community members living with a disability, my communities, my families, First Nations Territorians, members of the rainbow community, Madam Speaker. So many people protected in that piece of legislation. Now, others may say it didn't have any effect, but it did, Madam Speaker. It sent a strong message to everyone across the country and the Northern Territory that regardless of who they were and where they were, they mattered and that they needed to be protected, and that there was a bar that was not out of reach to stand up for our vulnerable communities, that there were the appropriate channels for people to be protected, to be cared for, and to be defended. It was the first piece of legislation in the world, Madam Speaker, to defend the rights of sex workers. The first piece of legislation in the world. The positive duties, the protected attributes, all things that matter to Territorians. Now we hear today, standing in this chamber, there is not a single member of this Legislative Assembly that can stand here today and tell me why this legislation needs to change as a result of a direct impingement on a Territorian. Has there been an increase in the last 2 years in complaints before the Northern Territory Anti-Discrimination Commissioner as a result of this legislation? No. There has not, Madam Speaker. So we ask ourselves, why? Why are we here today debating something that is not broken, debating something that has not impinged on any person in the Northern Territory, debating something that has afforded far-reaching protections for all Territorians, and we are here today listening to a government who is stripping that away, watering down hard-fought protections. This is not a journey that just happened, Madam Speaker. There have been many discussion papers, there have been many forums, there have been many workshops, there was draft exposure bills put out at the time for feedback on this process, Madam Speaker. Now, under this new government that's been in for over 12 months, who said that they were open, transparent and accountable, I acknowledge that they made these commitments as part of their election campaign, but since that date have been unable to articulate why, Madam Speaker. They refused to send the bill to a scrutiny committee to allow the members of the scrutiny committee the opportunity to determine whether or not a hearing would be required. And the government have the numbers on those committees. They could have still made a decision not to send it out for public consultation or to have a public hearing, but to at least have briefings from the Commissioner and other relevant stakeholders. But they chose not to. Fast forward, where then the bill's being introduced and then the Attorney-General says it's being deferred for further consultation. Not with every Territorian, but by a select few that the Attorney-General's chosen to do additional consultation with, and now we're being told today that there are no further amendments. The bill's back before us. So, Madam Speaker, today is a dark day for many people in our community. And it is a dark day and people are continuing to ask those questions as to why. Why water down those protections? And it is hard for many people in here to often put themselves in the shoes of another. There are only 5 people in this very parliament who are Aboriginal, There are only a few people in this parliament who come from a multiculturally diverse background, who have immigrated to Australia. As far as I know, Madam Speaker, I am the only person from the rainbow community in this very parliament. Yet we are discussing laws that impact the very core and essence of one's being without including them in a consultation process about winding back things that will absolutely protect them and stop them. We hear comments being spoken about, you should be able to make a joke. You shouldn't be able to make a joke at the expense of someone because they are a woman. You shouldn't be able to make a joke at the expense of someone because they are gay, lesbian, bisexual or trans. You should not be able to make a joke about someone because they are from another country and they've immigrated to Australia. That is not the territory that I want. That is not the territory that everyone out there that I know wants. Because modern societies don't discriminate against people's race, religion, sexuality, or identity. But what we see is a government who constantly come in here and ridicule and pinpoint and hijack people's identities and use them for their own gain. Now, Madam Speaker, we could be here all day talking about this. I absolutely acknowledge that everyone's going to have, in some way, shape or form, a different story to talk about today. But I am really disheartened that this is a government that have ignored meeting with major stakeholder groups to talk about a number of those changes. Now, I want to be clear, I absolutely do acknowledge that the Northern Territory Attorney-General has met with members of the rainbow community at various times. They feel like they were ignored by, their issues were ignored in those meetings. But I still acknowledge and I thank her for making the time to at least meet with them. Because this is an issue that they have to, as of tonight, think differently about their protections and their rights, as do Aboriginal Territorians, as do multicultural Territorians, as do our victims of domestic and family violence. Now, I know that the protected attributes sections are important and we're thankful that they are staying, but I do ask the government again, why? Why change something that is not broken? Why open the door to bigotry, to hate speech? Why legislate to make it okay to hate? Why make it okay to legislate to discriminate? When we passed the legislation 2 years ago, Madam Speaker, we actually had a huge number of community members. Didn't reach out to just the government, they reached out to members of the opposition and the independents at the time and said thank you. I am a teacher who works in a religious school and I actually feel comfortable to come out now and identify that I am in a lesbian relationship with my wife or my girlfriend, or I'm in a relationship with my husband or my partner, or I am trans, or I'm bisexual. I can live my life. I can be true to myself. And today that's been taken away. They're being put in a position now where their very being could cost them their job. Because we know as a result of this, a school now needs to produce a written document to say that yes, while this person might be of the faith, they are also in a same-sex relationship, we can discriminate against them for employment purposes. Think about the remote Northern Territory. In many communities, there's one school. And there might be a faith-based school. I've got a few of them in my electorate and they do a great job. But imagine that you are an Aboriginal person and you're either not religious or you're from the rainbow community and you want to get a job and there's only one school and you're a qualified teacher. You might not be able to work in your own community, where you come from, where your ancestors come from, where your creation story comes from, and you can't even get a job in your own community, in your own school, because someone else says that you're not fit to work at that school because of an ethos or a value set. That's discrimination. Doesn't matter how you try and package it, Madam Speaker. We had people talking about changes when the government came out and said, what if it's a faith-based organisation that says it delivers education? Can they discriminate against me because of my sexuality or my religion? That's the problem, Madam Speaker. These changes have not been clearly articulated to our community about what is about to change, Madam Speaker. It's creating uncertainty in our communities because people have campaigned for many years. And I want to thank many in our community. I want to thank Top End Pride, the Northern Territory AIDS and Hepatitis Council, the Sex Workers Alliance, our hard-working unions across the Northern Territory, the medical associations who've spoken about this, the education unions who have spoken about this, the hundreds of Territorians who have spoken about this. I want to acknowledge that there have been some faith-based schools, Madam Speaker, who have come out and said, we are not going to use the changes to discriminate, and we've built that into our enterprise bargaining agreements. But, Madam Speaker, where we are today is not necessary, because where we are today is not needed. Where we are today is better than where we were 2 years ago in this very parliament debating the Anti-Discrimination Act. Because for the last 2 years, we've rolled out the positive duty, we've rolled out those important protections, we've had education and information sessions rolled out across the Northern Territory, and we have not had an increase before the Commission that I am aware of, Madam Speaker, impinging or complaints of people's rights being impinged on because of these changes. That will tell you that this legislation has worked and is working, is protecting vulnerable people, marginalised people, is protecting every Territorian, because under the legislation as it is, every Territorian is protected. Every Territorian has the right to go to the Commission to seek support, to request or to lodge a complaint if they feel as though they have been discriminated against. So why are we here changing it? That's what I'm looking forward today from hearing from the government members, Madam Speaker, is tangible examples of why the legislation needs to change. Because I am all ears if I can legitimately have an actual example of why, of who, of how this has impacted negatively on someone in our community by changing this. This is not, and I absolutely want to make it clear, Madam Speaker, we keep hearing from people time and time again about this is changing free speech. It's not, Madam Speaker. This is about vilification and discrimination, and it's about making sure that we have strong protections in our community to stand up for our community members when they cannot stand up for themselves. I want to acknowledge the Northern Territory's Anti-Discrimination Commission, who has done a fantastic job over the last few years all of the staff at the Commission, rolling out that important work about the positive duty, about protected attributes, about what they are. Because this stuff matters, Madam Speaker. Because as I've said, today, by a simple vote in this Parliament, the decision to wind back anti-discrimination protections unnecessarily is going to happen. And again, we're going to hear from people, and it is categorically false, Madam Speaker, to suggest that the current anti-discrimination laws curtail freedom of speech. That is not true. Madam Speaker, this is huge today. And whilst the galleries might not be filled to the top with people here, I know that many people are listening today and many people will be hearing over the coming days and weeks about these changes and processing and trying to understand what that means for them. And to them, I say I stand with you. We continue our work, we continue our advocacy, and we continue our journey to restore the protections that are about to be stripped away from every Territorian today. Because it is not good enough. There is no reason why. And every Territorian deserves to feel safe, deserves to live a life free of discrimination, deserves to love who they want to love and not be shamed or discriminated against for loving that person, deserves to feel comfortable to go out in the community and not have to worry about being subjected to hateful, to racist, to bigotry behaviour. The number one complaint to the Anti-Discrimination Commission in the Northern Territory is disability complaints. People in our community who are living with a disability, Madam Speaker, they are the vulnerable Territorians that have the number one complaint before the Commission. They are people who can be easily discriminated against as of tomorrow under this legislation. Let's take a moment to think about that. Because many of us in here, we come in, we debate things, we leave. Some of us go back and talk to our communities, others just move on. Well, people from marginal and vulnerable communities, they just can't move on. They have to live every day and be subjected to horrible comments, horrible behaviours, discrimination, and that is not good. That is not the Northern Territory that we need to be promoting. That is not the Northern Territory that I want to be talking about. I want a territory that is free of discrimination, that is free of bigotry, that embraces anyone and everyone from all walks of life, from all life choices, from who they are and where they come from, and that is important. So, Madam Speaker, today I will absolutely be opposing the legislative amendment bill to the Northern Territory's Anti-Discrimination Act. Don't change something that's not broken. Don't change something that's not hurting anyone. And people who are encouraging this, go home and look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself why. Why do I need to do this? Why do I need to feel like I am freer to be hateful, that I need to be freer to discriminate against someone, when for the last 2 years this legislation has been doing its job? Protecting people, defending the most vulnerable people in our community, and providing an appropriate course of action if action is required for investigation, substantiation and referring matters. The Anti-Discrimination Commission has functions that if there are aggrieved parties, they can bring people together, have a mediation, have a hearing, talk about it, work together to overcome the indifference. But today we say, nah, no need for that. I just want to be able to make a joke about you in the pub while I'm having a few beers, chucking them back, and it be okay. The threshold that is being proposed in this legislation, Madam Speaker, is so high that it will never, probably ever, be able to be met. Which means that people will see more discrimination under this change. And that's not the territory that we want, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Member for Karama.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I don't intend to talk too long, but I think this is a really important bill to talk to. And look, I recognise, and I think most people around here, that there are legitimately different views on this bill. And that's acceptable. We're a democracy. People think one way, other people think the other way. But having said that, as with much legislation introduced into this Assembly, I think we need to look at it from a point of view of policy balance. Policy balance. And when we look at that policy pendulum, sure, it can vary from the extreme left to the extreme right, neither of which may I say I follow. I think in developing policy and associated legislation, we need to take a common sense approach that reflects our community's expectation and desire, which I believe generally takes us towards the centre, And from my perspective, my decisions in this Assembly are strongly influenced by the views of the overwhelming majority of my electorate. Noting, of course, it's unrealistic to expect that we're ever going to get full 100% agreement. I don't see that happening. But you will get a majority saying this is the view of where we think we want to go. So before I get onto this bill, I want to reflect on the various reducing crime bills that we have introduced in our first year of government, including bail reform, minimum mandatory sentencing for assaulting frontline workers, increased police powers, etc. Now, I recall that we had views for and against the introductions of these bills, and that's legitimate. We're allowed to have it. Now, whilst I appreciate the concerns raised by those on the opposition benches who opposed the introduction of these bills, personally, I am confident that we had the support of the majority of Territorians to proceed, including those living in my electorate. Improved community safety was what they wanted. And I must admit, I think only the CLP was willing to generally act on this rather than ignoring them. So that's where we sort of, you might have a centre left, you might have a centre right, whatever, but I think it was the community expectation that drove us. And we were confident that what we were delivering was what the balance of the community wanted. And guess what, Madam Speaker? Here we are, just over 1 year since I got sworn into this Assembly along with others. I think it was the 15th of October last year. And the sun still comes up in the morning and sets in the evening. It hasn't been doom and gloom and gone because we've introduced what we believe the community wanted. We are going forward. And as I flagged in my response to the ministerial report on backing small business earlier today, I believe the majority of Territorians, and definitely those in my electorate of Karama, are feeling much more optimistic about the future of the Territory with the CLP government in power. They got a much better future. They can see it for their families and their kids going forward. And that, to me, is a good thing. That's a very good thing. So let's get to the bill itself, and let's reiterate. What does the bill do? And I'm going to quote this because I want to get it right. The bill does not remove protections from the Anti-Discrimination 1992, the Act, rather retains and expands upon the protections currently available under the Act. The amendments proposed by the bill are intended to enhance protection of vulnerable communities from hate speech and discrimination. Vulnerable communities consist of all people and groups with a protected attribute under the Act, which include, for example, race, religion, age and sex. The bill, first of all, amends the protection against vilification by simply replacing 3 words with another set of 3 words. So it replaces the words offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate with incites hatred, serious contempt or severe ridicule of a person or group because of a protected attribute. The effect of this is that the protection is incitement-based rather than requiring a threshold of harm to be established. And I'm going to get back to the issue of offence later. And the bill inserts a new section to reintroduce an exemption for religious educational institutions operating in accordance with the doctrine of a particular religion to discriminate in the area of work on the ground of religious belief and activity, and in good faith to avoid offending the religious sensitivities of a reasonable person of the religion, a reasonable person. The exemption allows a religious educational institution to preference employing persons of the same religion and establish requirements of the conduct for persons employed in the workplace, but only where the elements of the religious doctrine are set out in written policy. Now, in my electorate and adjoining areas, I have a number of faith-based schools, including Catholic senior and primary schools and an Islamic college. Now, I believe these schools deserve the right to employ teachers and staff that share the values of their faith to deliver cohesive learning in line with the shared values of their own families. If I choose to send my child to a faith-based school, then I would expect that the faith-based school is going to share the values of why I'm sending them there. So if I'm a Catholic sending it to a Catholic school, I would hope that the Catholic values come through. If I'm Islamic and I'm sending to an Islamic school, I would hope that they would share the values of the Islamic faith with those. And every other faith-based too. And I know there's Lutherans and there's a whole range of other schools as well. It is important to note the religious exemption recognises that religion is a protected attribute under the Act and that the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion or belief can at times intersect with other fundamental rights, such as the right to non-discrimination and equality. Where fundamental rights intersect, a balance must be struck to preserve both the rights to the highest degree possible. That is what the religious exemption seeks to do. So the amendment to the vilification prohibition responds to concerns that prohibition based on offensive behaviour overly limits the freedom of speech, while the incitement-based protection is better understood by the community. Now, I am a strong supporter of freedom of speech, and it really does come, it's part of my DNA. I think people should be able to speak. I don't have to agree with what they say. I can absolutely be against what they say, but I fundamentally respect their right to say it. And I think we've got to be careful where we go on limiting that. Now, the amendment to the vilification prohibition makes it clear where the right to freedom of speech is limited, being where conduct such as hate speech is capable of inciting hatred, serious contempt or severe ridicule of a person or group with a protected attribute. The vilification prohibition continues to protect against hate speech and retains the mechanism in which a person or group may seek recourse against an individual or conduct that constitutes vilification under the Act. So there are protections. We have not removed all these protections. They are there. We've just changed the emphasis slightly. As I said, I think we're in the centre. Now, I know in the development of this bill, I know the Attorney General has been lobbied by very many groups. Some want us to go harder. And that's their right. They've come and said, no, you're not going far enough. You've got to go much further. And we said, hang on, I'm not too sure about that. We're going to come back. Some don't want us to do anything. We say, well, hang on, you're not listening to what we're getting as the majority feedback to us. We do need to respond to the community. And I think what we've got here, and it may not be perfect, I'm sure, and we can discuss this in consideration in detail, but I think we have struck the middle. And that is a good thing. We're not going to get agreement on all sides, but I think we've taken a good middle course, and I understand why we're trying to get the freedom of speech back in there and also religious rights for faith-based schools. Now, let me finish off on that concept of offence and free speech. I mentioned also in my earlier speech that I did a mobile office at Malacca. That's okay, I sat down there, set up in the morning, fine. A lot of people came up and said, hello Brian, good to see you and whatever, and they do that. However, there was one car came up, he came up Darwin Street, turning into Malacca Crescent, just where I was, and he had a trailer on the thing, and he had the window down, and I've just set up. He said, hey, are you getting paid to stand there? I said, yes. And he said, F off. Okay. Now, was I offended? No. Others may have been, because it was his right to express his view. I may not like him to say it, but he was entitled to say his view. And I will stand by his right to say the view. I wish he'd stopped to talk to me. That would have been good. And as one of my colleagues said, what I should have said is, I hope you have the day you deserve, sir, and just let him go. But that's okay. So it does remind me of the old saying, you know, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names can never hurt me. Now, some people may take some of these hard. Well, you've got to learn to deal with that. But it is the right of people to say. So let me reassure everyone that when this bill gets passed today, which I'm sure it will, there may be changes, I'm not going to preempt what's going to happen. Yes, some people in this House may not support it, but I'm confident that the majority of Territorians will support enhancements to free speech and religious rights. I think they see that as a common sense approach of where we're going. Now, this bit I couldn't resist. And look, I know the member for 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎 was very passionate, but he did get me thinking there. Finally, I listened to the concerns raised by the member for 𝙏𝙬 when he didn't like the idea of people being able to make jokes, and I say again jokes, that touched on nationality, sex or race. Well, Madam Speaker, if that is the case, we may as well get rid of all our fantastic comedians who have entertained us over the years, including Billy Connolly, Dave Allen, Spike Milligan, and of course the magnificent John Cleese. I remember so many Irish jokes in my time, don't you worry about that. And so to all our Irishmen, a Scotsman and an Englishman walk into the bar jokes, they have to stop. Surely not, surely not. But just on that, let me go back to the magnificent John Cleese, because I'm going to finish with a quote from him. And he says, here's a definition of wokeism. There are people just sitting there who are deliberately waiting for the thrill of being offended. That's what he said. I'll say it again. Here's the definition of wokeism. There are people just sitting there who are deliberately waiting for the thrill of being offended. Well, I get offended sometimes, but I'm not going to take it too hard. You know, I can move on. I hope other people do too. But this bill is really, I think, in the middle ground. It's in the centre. It's an important bill. It touches on an important topic, and I commend the bill. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Member for Blaine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this bill. I would love to speak today about the freedom of speech aspects and how important it is to be able to protect the freedom of speech so that people can engage in robust debates without fear of being hauled through processes and potentially hauled before the courts for their speech, as we're currently seeing happen in the UK for people who make silly posts on social media. But I won't speak about that today because I want to focus today on something that's a lot more relevant to my electorate of Blaine, which is the freedom of faith-based schools to be able to go about their business, employ teachers, which is, we all know, is hard enough to do in the Northern Territory, and teachers who align with their beliefs, their doctrines, so that they can educate the students that parents send to their schools in the expectation that the teachers and the school would have a faith-based approach and that would be an intrinsic part of that education. And the freedom of those schools to be able to focus on delivering a faith-based education and a high-quality faith-based education without having to worry about accidentally stepping on a landmine and ending up in court because they didn't tick a box. So, Sacred Heart Catholic Primary School, which is a K-6 in the suburb of Woodruff in Palmerston. That's an absolutely fantastic primary school, and I do believe that the Chief Minister may have attended that school when she was a little whippersnapper. Absolutely amazing school. We're working through Emery Avenue has been in the news for not the best reasons over the last year, particularly last year, and we're slowly working through those issues. Unfortunately, last year under the previous government, they had an end-of-year dance that they had to cancel due to safety issues. I would love to be able to say that those issues are all in the past. We're not quite there yet, but we're in a much better place than we were last year. But they are a faith-based school. They have a Catholic church on the school grounds, Madam Speaker, and so they have regular masses there, and it's an integral part of school life that students go and attend Mass at the school, at the church on the grounds. And I've attended a couple of those Masses, as I believe the member for Brennan has, I think. And it's a very, very rich tapestry of life they have there at that school. Good Shepherd Lutheran School in the wonderful suburb of Grey for my colleague, the member for Drysdale. One of my good friends who unfortunately is no longer in the Territory. Her and her husband had to move away under the reign of terror of the previous government because they weren't able to sustain their lifestyle here. But she was a school teacher and she used to work at that school. She was an absolutely fantastic teacher. And every year at the start of the year, they have an open day where they welcome people from all over Palmerston and all over Darwin to come and enjoy the fetes and the stalls they put on. That's a great school. Palmerston Christian School and College, K through 12, which I believe is in the member for Nelson's electorate over in the suburb of Marlowe's Lagoon, just adjacent to my own. Fantastic local school, and I think they actually even host one of the churches that we have in Palmerston. Is that Zion? Zion, I think, yeah. So there's a very intimate relationship between that school and, again, a faith-based group. You know, the previous member for Blaine, I think, was a principal at that school many, many years ago before he was pre-selected to run for Blaine. MacKillop Catholic College, not in my electorate, in the electorate of Spilett, but a fantastic college. We had a large group of their Year 10s here today. I had the honour of accompanying them upstairs to meet the Chief Minister and take some photos. They were here in the gallery. I've sat with the principal of that school, and I was incredibly impressed by what an earnest, decent, and hard-working man of faith he was. This is someone who wrestles with many, many issues, and for his own safety has had to put CCTV in his own office so that he can be sure that if any allegations of impropriety come, that in his office everything is recorded so that for his own protection. And I won't go into too much detail because that's his story, but he's shared with me how he's wrestled with finding teachers and how hard it is to find teachers in the NT and how they navigate the tension between seeking people who align with the school's faith-based agenda versus the candidates of the highest quality. And I will come to how that is resolved later in my speech. Mr. Deputy Speaker. Outside of Palmerston, we have Marara Christian School, which I believe is another K through 12. Many of my friends have gone there over the years. That's not as much of a traditional Catholic school, but very, very high quality faith-based school nonetheless. Good Shepherd College over in Howard Springs for our 7 to 12s. O'Loughlin Catholic College, and I'm sure many, many other faith-based schools in the Darwin area and down the track that I haven't had the opportunity to get to know just yet. But all the schools that I've listed so far are in the Christian tradition, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But that's not the only faith-based religious tradition that we have in the Territory. We also have our wonderful and rich Islamic faith here in the Territory. I have a mosque right in my electorate in the suburb of Maldon, which is very rich, and every Friday they're there praying. They have regular feasts and celebrations in accordance with their calendar, and I've been along to Eid with other members of my colleagues, and they're very solid, hard-working people with a great deal of character and integrity. They also, the Islamic faith in Darwin, they have the Australian International Islamic College in Berrimah. That's a school. It's running there. I think they started with somewhere on the order of 32 students. I have to check up and see how many enrolments they're up to now. I hope they're doing well. I say all that to say that faith-based schools are everywhere in the Northern Territory, particularly out in our regional and remote areas, particularly on remote communities. And they are an integral part of the fabric of our society. Now, as a father of 3 boys, I want the best education for them that I can possibly get. Now, I've personally wrestled with the thought of, do I send them to a public school or to a faith-based school or a non-denominational private school? And for our family, personally, we settled on sending our kids to a local public school because we thought that it would be good for them to be exposed to, at the primary school level, to the hurly-burly of ideas. And for our particular circumstances, that was the decision that we made. But I understand that a lot of parents and a lot of families choose to send their kids to a faith-based school because in their consideration, they look at the fact that the school has an explicit faith-based agenda, which carries a whole lot of things with it. If anyone has ever read, the Sermon on the Mount, the sections of the New Testament where the prophet Jesus of Nazareth delivers that sermon, if you haven't ever read it, and if you think that religious people are full of hate, I encourage you to read it. Go and read it and try to find any hate in there. I've read it and I can't find any. It was only love. And I think in my discussions with faith-based schools, there is a lot of love. And parents who choose to send their kids to faith-based schools need to know that there will be a moral theme to their children's education that's not just about numeracy and literacy and history and all that good stuff that kids learn. That the school is free to be able to have an unapologetic embrace of its faith, of its religious principles. If it's a school that's founded on the Judeo-Christian tradition, that they'll be able to talk about Jesus without anyone being offended, that they'll be able to talk about, that the Christian tradition You know, if it's a Catholic school, I'm sure they'll talk about, you know, the saints, and I'm not a Catholic myself, so I don't know what they talk about too much, so I won't go much further into that. But parents need to be sure that the faith, that if they send their children to a faith-based school, that a faith-based education will be part of what their children come away with. And that means that they need to be free to be able to choose the teachers that go there. Now, in my discussions with principals at faith-based schools, they are quite open. They don't want to exclude someone on the basis of a protected characteristic. They want the best teachers available who are willing to ascribe to the values of the school. But at the same time, they need to be safe that if they make a decision and someone has a protected characteristic, that they're not going to end up in court simply because they're a target. Faith-based schools these days, unfortunately, walk around with a great big fat target on their backs. And they need to be able to focus on education and running their school according to their faith the best they can, without having to worry about defending themselves in court if they choose the better candidate, but the other candidate had a protected characteristic and then makes a complaint, and then everything ends up somewhere. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I support this bill. I support the rights. I support strengthening the Anti-Discrimination Act to give certainty and security to parents and staff of faith-based schools in the Northern Territory. I commend the bill to the House.
Thank you, Member for Blaine. Any further speakers? Any further speakers? Member Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to speak on the Anti-Discrimination Amendments Bill 2025. And along with my Territory Labor colleagues, I will not be supporting this legislation. To be blunt and honest, this is a sad day for the Northern Territory. Those opposite have chosen to go down the path of implementing amendments to legislation, particularly Section 20A of the Act, that is regressive and unnecessary. In the past months, it has been clear in our public discourse that hate speech, discrimination and vilification are on the rise. Only a couple of months ago, we all stood in this chamber and condemned racism in all its forms. But now, we are standing here debating legislation that affects some of our most vulnerable people in our society. For what purpose? To strip them of their basic protections from vilification in a public place? We look around Australia and consider other jurisdictions that have strengthened laws against divisive speech and activity and the community. Who could they look to for those strong laws? It was, up until today, the Northern Territory. The laws passed by the former Labor Territory government in 2023 were nation-leading and designed to protect Territorians from public conduct likely to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate on the grounds of race, on the grounds of sexuality, on the grounds of gender, disability, religion and a range of other attributes. The former Territory Labor government brought in these legislative changes following an extensive consultation process with stakeholders, and those opposite claim to have consulted, but it has been limited and without genuine intent. We witnessed this on the introduction of this legislation, when the CLP government bypassed once again their own Legislative Scrutiny Committee for the 27th time. The 27th time the CLP government have bypassed their own Scrutiny Committee that they'd set up at the start of this term. They were forced to pull this bill last month at the 11th hour because they had failed to properly engage with stakeholders about their amendments. They were taken by surprise, despite requests from members for 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎 and the member for Jinson, both of whom were willing to undertake the work as members of the committee. Yet the CLP government refused to subject its own legislation to the scrutiny test, thereby rejecting transparency and accountability. It is truly shameful that they have such disregard for the processes they pretended to be so proud of early in their term. It is also disheartening that the CLP government is disregarding stakeholders' deep concerns, and the community's rejections of its reasoning has been loud and clear. Apart from the Attorney-General's poor attempt to conflate being offended by a glass of water with the type of vilification faced by vulnerable members of our community, this rhetoric is based and populist, drawn from the gutter of Trumpian-like discourse. During the estimates process, I asked the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner the following question: does the existing legislative framework and protections effectively respond to preventing racial vilification and discrimination? And the Commissioner's response responded with, the current version of the vilification provision concerning Section 20A is sufficient for our purposes in terms of meeting the needs and vilification of the Northern Territory. Hence, there was no need to look into amending or repealing it. From the Commissioner's perspective, the current provision in Section 20A is sufficient. The Commissioners also went on to say later during the estimates process, and I quote, the current version of Section 20A, the vilification provision, I think is one of the strongest pieces of vilification law that is already in place. It is highly visionary in terms of where we are going with that reform. I think it is one that, and perhaps this is an opinion piece, we need to protect in the Northern Territory. Any other version of the vilification provisions would be watering it down. What we say at the Commission is that the current version holds, and it has the strongest piece of vilification law that we have in Australia, and there is no need for further amendments to that provision. End quote. Given the laws as they stand are about eliminating discrimination and promoting equal opportunities for all Territorians, this CLP government is turning its back once again on the evidence and on those with expertise. But we know that the Attorney-General is sick of hearing about the evidence-based policies, to her absolute shame. In time where we're seeing Nazi protests down south, in Darwin, we even heard the minister, the Multicultural Affairs Minister, quote Nazis in this very chamber, and then tried to defend it by saying, oh no, you all misheard that, you're misquoting me. Don't worry about that. It's just a misunderstanding. He couldn't even have the humility to come in here and apologise for his own comments. You had the member for Karama during an adjournment speech on Thursday the 27th of March 2025 come in here, and I now pick up why he supports this bill, because this lays it out. And I quote, in between sittings, I had the opportunity of going to a 50th school reunion in Melbourne, which was fabulous. That shows everyone how old I am, and I'm compared to these youngsters. I had not seen people for 50 years and it is amazing that within 5 minutes it was like we had never left. We were picking up on the same conversations, the same dirty jokes I used to tell them we were still telling now, and the same observations we made about women then we are making now. That is what your own member, the CLP member, the member for Karama, has been quoting in here. Is that something you support, Attorney General? Those quotes? Silence? You do or you don't? Is that something you support, that the member for Karama?
Member for Daly, can you direct your conversation through the chair, please? Not directly to Ms.
Clearly she's rattled by it, but that is what the member for Karama has come in here, Mr. Speaker, and said in this very own chamber about women. About women. That is what the member for Karama has come in and said about women in this chamber. It's absolutely disgraceful. And I would assume...
Sorry, order. No interjections, please. Continue.
And we just heard the member for Fenny Bay pipe up, clearly supporting the quotes, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of the member for Karama. Unless she's going to get up and say in her speech she denounces those quotes, and I hope she would, because they are absolutely disgusting. They are absolutely disgraceful at this day and age that the member for Karama, Mr. Deputy Speaker, thinks that those quotes are all right. To come in here and degrade women. How disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself, member for Karama. The hateful rhetoric towards vulnerable communities is on the rise and is just beyond me as to this government's reasoning. Laws surrounding discrimination need to reflect our modern values and expectations, especially on how we treat others in our public places. Therefore, in closing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I cannot and will not support amendments to this legislation. Thank you.
Member for Mulga.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on this anti-discrimination bill. I understand that there are some changes to this law that are significant, but that it doesn't revert back to the laws from 2022. Instead, this bill brings changes to the Labor amendments that water down protections that were created in 2022. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Section 20A currently prohibits conduct in a public place that is likely to offend, insult, or humiliate a person or people because of an attribute. This bill amends Section 20A and removes often often, insult, and humiliate, and replaces it with incite, hatred towards serious contempt for a severe ridicule of this waters down the intentions of the 2022 changes that the Labor government made. In 2025, we went we need stronger, in 2025, we need stronger protections. We need both layers that the Labour Party brought in 2022, and we need the changes that CLP is bringing now. But we also need to take the breaking of these laws much more seriously. If the CLP government are going to bring a bill to amend the Act once again, then it should have been done properly with a thorough review and consultation. This bill should have been sent to the Scrutiny Committee for community consultations. Today in the Northern Territory, we can feel high levels of discrimination. We know that there are serious and entrenched uses of discrimination in the NT, and many people feel that these problems are growing. The Anti-Discrimination Commission is tasked with the job of investigating discrimination, and there must be a real consequences that people and institutions away from following toxic cultures to become more normal, that allow vilification and high offensive and damaging language and behavior to occur. Many people in this chamber will understand the impact of discrimination, and a personal level, a person is harmed deeply by offensive behaviors of discrimination. I personally felt this deep hurt. So it is important that we protect people by creating laws that set a high standard, that say that discrimination will not be tolerated, and penalties will be enforced. Mr. Deputy Speaker, for this reason, I cannot support this bill. I agree with vilification laws bring the anti-law into line with other jurisdictions, but other jurisdictions, such as the Queensland, also have made serious vilification or a criminal offence, and this is missing from this bill. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I understand that since 2022, there have only been 3 complaints made to the Commissioner in relation to the public conduct. That was offence, humiliating or intimidating. The implementation of this law has been opened the floodgate, has opened the floodgates to numerous complaints or shuts down free speech as the CLP suggested it would. And I would like to see both the offensive behavior. I would like to see both the offensive behavior and the vilification sections adopted within the Act. And I would also like to see the government sending a clear message to that discrimination is not okay. There is a current message coming from a government that they don't want to infringe and a freedom of speech, and the people should be allowed to be offensive and public, and not be concerned about it. This message began in 2022 when they opposed the Labor bill, but over 3 years later, we can clearly see that the bill was okay, and it was not impacted on freedom of speech. Despite this, the CLP have chosen to amend the bill, and the story they tell is about freedom and speech and freedom to offend people. But that story should really be about the importance of protecting people. This government is yet to begin talking about the safety and protection of all people in our communities. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will speak briefly to the changes to Section 35. This section inserts an exemption for work in religious education settings. I am not opposed to religious schools being able to recruit staff who align with the faith of the school community. But I also believe that they can employ people of any faith. I am opposed to the idea that any school might discriminate against people or of other reasons, for other reasons rather, and I hope that Section 35B(2) would not allow this to happen. I have concerns that the schools may take this section further by saying that they will not allow a divorced person or a single parent teacher or a gay teacher or an Aboriginal teacher who still participates in traditional ceremonies. As I understand, Section 35B may allow pathway for this, and that is concerning. As a Christian myself, these examples I have given go against the teachings of Christianity that I understand. I understand that Jesus teaches that we must be accepting and compassionate towards one another, and it is not our place to judge. So I have concerns that Section 35B may discriminate against people for who they are and cause harm. Mr. Deputy Speaker, things have changed from 2022 to 2025, and this bill was an opportunity to improve the laws, while it has retained some of the intentions of the Labor bill in 2022. Overall, it has failed. Well, it has failed to bring the strong improvements that we need to see in 2025. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Mulca. And before we proceed, members, I'd just like to acknowledge the former member for Casuarina in the gallery, Lauren Moss. Welcome, Lauren. Okay, thank you. Member for Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise today to speak in strong opposition to the Anti-Discrimination Amendment Bill 2025. Before I address the specifics of this bill, I want to speak to an issue raised by the member for Karama. He said the job of government is to listen... Excuse me. Give me one moment. Bear with me, sorry. I appear to have lost my speech. I've got 30 minutes. Yep. Apologies, everyone. I will. Some reflective time. That's some reflective time. Yeah, that would be great. If someone wants to just sing along, that would be perfect. Apologies. So the member for Karama said that the job of government is to listen to the middle, to follow the median voter, to respond to the loudest voices or the most powerful interests. That is not the job of government. That is not leadership, that is followership.
Sorry, Attorney General.
That is not what the member for Karama said, so I don't think you should verbal him unless you know exactly what he said. We could get a rush on Hansard if you want to check what he said, but that's not what he said.
Okay. Yes. I'm happy to rephrase that, and if needed, that's fine. I understood that the member for Karama said that the job of government is to listen to the majority. I'm happy to check on that. However,
Johnson, I think while you're checking, you might just withdraw in the meantime.
Sure, that's fine. I'm happy to withdraw it while it's checked on. But the true measure of government is not how it treats its comfortable majority, it's how it protects the most vulnerable. Those who have no voice, no power and no protection except what the law provides. We have an obligation, not just a political option, but a moral obligation to protect the most vulnerable members of our community and not to pander to powerful interest groups. This bill is a clear example of a government abandoning that obligation. This bill is not abstract, it is not theoretical, it is not just about words, it is about people's everyday lives. It represents a serious step backwards for human rights in the Northern Territory. It proposes to roll back protections that Territorians fought hard for and should be proud of, protections that ensure safety, dignity and equality in our workplaces, in our schools and in our communities. Mr Deputy Speaker, these proposed amendments will affect people throughout the Northern Territory, including people here in this chamber. If you have a child who is gay, who is gender diverse, this bill will make it harder for them to feel safe at school or in their workplace. If you have someone in your family with a disability, they could face humiliation in public without protection from the law. If you have a parent or grandparent who speaks English as a second language, they could be abused for the way they speak and find they have no recourse. These are not special interest issues. They are family issues. They are the issues of our community. They are about whether our children, our parents, our neighbours are treated with dignity in the territory that we are all proud to call home. When protections are stripped back, it doesn't just affect other people, it affects all of us, because at some point in our lives, each of us, or someone we care about, can face exclusion or discrimination for who we are, for what we believe, or for how we live. So we've heard that this bill seeks to replace our current harm-based model with an incitement model. This means that conduct will only be unlawful if it incites hatred, serious contempt, or severe ridicule. This is not just 3 words changing. This is not just a technical adjustment. This is a fundamental weakening of protection against hate speech. Conduct that offends, humiliates or intimidates based on race, religion, sexuality or gender could now be considered as lawful unless it meets this very high threshold. And let's be clear about what that actually means in practice. Right now, under our current laws, if a young person with a disability is shouted at with slurs on a bus, that's unlawful. If an elderly person is verbally abused in public because of who they are, they have protection. If hateful graffiti is scrawled on a school or community building, that is covered. But under these amendments, these acts may not be unlawful because they don't incite others to join in. That is the reality. That is not protecting free speech. It is giving a green light to everyday vilification and hate that causes real harm in our community. The Anti-Discrimination Commissioner has been very clear. Any other version, and I quote, any other version of the vilification provision will be watering it down. The current protections are the strongest we have in Australia, and these amendments are unnecessary and symbolically harmful. They do not restore balance, they strip away rights and undermine the very purpose of anti-discrimination law, equality of opportunity. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know this bill also extends to faith-based schools. It would allow schools to refuse to hire people of other faiths or impose workplace rules based on doctrine. This means that a Jewish teacher could be denied a job at a Catholic school, a Muslim or Hindu applicant could be refused purely because of their faith. Even highly skilled, experienced professionals could be excluded for no reason other than belief. It also means that schools can tell staff what they can say about their family, their sexuality and even their private lives. That is not religious freedom. That is state-sanctioned discrimination. And despite these far-reaching changes, the government refused to send this bill to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee. We've heard in this chamber that they did, however, send the Animal Protection Bill and the Environment Protection Beverage Containers and Plastic Bags legislation amendment, 2 very uncontroversial pieces of legislation for proper review. So Territorians are left with the message: the government believes animals deserve scrutiny and safeguards, that how bottle caps are treated deserves scrutiny and safeguards, but whether you are safe from discrimination in your workplace and in public does not. Many people contacted me concerned about the lack of legitimate and meaningful consultation in this bill and the fact that it was not referred to a scrutiny committee, and asked whether there was a way they could communicate their concerns. In response to this request, I established a community scrutiny forum where I invited people to provide submissions and undertook to provide a report to the Attorney-General and the Parliament about those submissions. I delivered the Community Scrutiny Forum report to the Attorney-General and every member of this chamber on Monday of this week, so all have had plenty of time to review it. The fact that it is left to an independent member with no resources to undertake this process that the community is calling for, that should have been done by the Parliament, should make all of us question what the commitment of this government actually is to transparency and democracy. I also provided the report to the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, and he responded in writing saying, "Thank you for sharing the outcomes of the Community Scrutiny Forum and for your leadership in ensuring the community's voice was heard when the bill was not referred to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee as it should have been. Your efforts in facilitating this parallel process have provided valuable civic transparency." After reviewing the Forum's report, I provide the following observations on behalf of the Anti-Discrimination Commission. The ADC agrees with recommendations 1 and 2 of the Community Scrutiny Forum, namely to retain the current vilification provisions in Section 20A and to reject the reintroduction of religious exemptions in new Section 35B. The ADC appreciates the Forum's advocacy in upholding principles of equality and fairness under the Northern Territory Anti-Discrimination Act 1992. I seek leave to table this letter.
Is leave granted? Leave's granted.
Madam Speaker, this community scrutiny report, which everyone in this chamber has a copy of, summarises submissions made, and from those submissions recommends, as the Anti-Discrimination Commission just reflected, that Section 20A should retain its current threshold of offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate, which ensures that the law continues to capture the serious, commonplace acts of vilification that undermine dignity, safety and equality in the community, and that 2, new Section 35B should be discarded, so the reintroduction of an exemption allowing religious education institutions to discriminate against employees based on religion will not be legislated. I also seek leave to table the Community Scrutiny Forum report.
Is leave granted? I think the ayes have it. Leave's granted.
To ensure these views are heard within this chamber, I'll quote some of the submissions that the Forum received now. The North Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency said, "Weakening these protections sends an alarming message to the community about the behaviour considered acceptable in the Northern Territory and how little value is placed on the experiences of those impacted by vilification." The Northern Territory Council of Social Service said that the proposed amendments will make Territorians less safe and calls for the current protections in the Anti-Discrimination Act to be retained. They also highlighted the lack of wide consultation on these changes and caution that allowing religious education institutions to discriminate will have profound negative impacts. The NT Mental Health Coalition expresses concerns that materials have not been made readily available to the community by the Northern Territory Government to better inform them of the impact of these proposed changes. And they emphasise that amending this legislation will have an impact on the mental health of the community, particularly on people who identify as LGBTIQA+, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, people living with disabilities and young people. The National Network of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls states that the bill weakens protections, entrenches discrimination and creates barriers to justice for those who already experience systemic inequality. And they urge our Parliament to retain broad protections in Section 20A for offensive behaviour that humiliates or intimidates, not only extreme vilification, and to remove or strictly limit religious exemptions, ensuring all educational environments are inclusive and non-discriminatory. The President of the Hindu Society warns that the proposed changes to the Anti-Discrimination Act will soften hate speech and create an avenue for white extremists to prosper. They also note that allowing religious schools to discriminate will be detrimental to the quality of teaching available to the students, and that diversity among employees creates an environment of harmony. The founder of Vibrant Diverse Cultures Inc., an advocacy group focused on social capital for underrepresented groups, describes the potential psychological harm caused by these amendments as great harm in the community, especially given the current state of mental health services and resources in the Northern Territory, and they strongly recommend community consultation with affected groups before any legislative changes take place. It's important we listen to all voices, and that is the point of holding a community scrutiny forum. and our invitation to respond welcomed all views. And there was one submission from the minister from St Peter's Anglican Church in Nightcliff which expressed support for new section 35B and said, being a Christian is a way of life, not only an attitude brought to the workplace, and that religious education institutions should be able to apply their values to the private lives of employees, not only in the workplace. I note that this was the only submission that expressed support for any aspect of these proposed amendments. One long-term Territory member of several protected classes said in their submission, discrimination is an ongoing reality in our community and legal protections make a real difference to safety and belonging. They stressed that the NT's world-leading vilification provisions must not be weakened, religious exemptions must not be reinstated, and reforms must be based on evidence, on human rights standards and on genuine community consultation rather than political expediency. An Aboriginal constituent in my electorate deeply affected by intergenerational trauma said to me, especially with these government's policies, my children are seriously scared and this makes me very worried for my family. Another constituent subjected to racist slurs in childhood fears that the proposed replacement of offensive behaviour with incite hatred, serious contempt or severe ridicule will exclude many experiences of real harm. They said, the words offend, humiliate or intimidate should be retained as these cover racist slurs and religious vilification and allow a wider interpretation of the Act. A member of a minority religion states, discrimination because of religion, faith, nationality, race or ability can be cruel and result in severe consequences, and urge the Parliament to uphold principles of respect and fairness and do all it can to prevent hate and hostility. A queer Christian Territorian said, the Australian Christian lobby represents fundamentalists, not the majority of parishioners, and fears these amendments will allow religious schools the privilege of discriminating against another group based on attributes which do not affect the person's ability to undertake a job. They said that it might have made a difference during difficult times in my own life if there were some queer Christian role models, and who better than teachers for kids to look up to. Another constituent said, not many people in the Northern Territory would want to live in a society that legitimises one person or group able to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate another. The Anti-Discrimination Act should bring people together to coexist harmoniously, focusing on respect, tolerance and understanding of different cultures and religions. Mr Deputy Speaker, I also want to speak to a petition provided to me today, which I will be formally tabling on Tuesday. This petition was signed by almost 1,400 people in less than 24 hours this week. And the petition says, we implore the Whanokiraro government to abandon their imminent plan to amend the Northern Territory Anti-Discrimination Act. The CLP's plan will allow for increased hate speech and religious discrimination in our communities. This targets First Nation people, women, people of colour, sister girls, brother boys, LGBTIQAP+ people, all marginalised people, our education system and all people living in the Northern Territory. No community consent has been provided for this to occur and we reject the government's intentions.
Sorry, Member for Johnson, we're just swapping with the Acting Deputy Speaker for 15 minutes. Thank you.
And we reject the government's intentions in the strongest possible terms. Why is this important? On Thursday, 16th October 2025, the Northern Territory Government under Leah Whanokiraro is planning to change the Northern Territory Anti-Discrimination Act, rolling back recently won protections for vulnerable community members. The vilification provision in the current Anti-Discrimination Act has been called one of the strongest pieces of vilification law that is currently in place and highly visionary by the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner. The Whanokiraro government intends to amend Section 20A of the Act to provide a higher threshold for what is considered vilification, allowing for increased levels of hate speech against marginalised communities in the Northern Territory. This is occurring in a political climate where racist rhetoric and anti-sister girl, brother boy, LGBTQIA+ sentiment are high. And Section 35B, allowing religious organisations to discriminate against employees on the ground of religious belief or to avoid offending religious sensibilities. This has grave implications for sister girl, brother boy, �𝙿𝘼𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙑+ teachers working in religious schools, and creates unsafe school environments for these people, their students and their families. Students and teachers deserve a safe environment in which to thrive and learn free from discrimination. This is one of many sustained attacks on community safety by the CLP government. We cannot allow this erosion of our hard-won protections. And as I said, that's been signed by nearly 1,400 people now. Madam Deputy Speaker, is that acting? The consequences of this bill are tangible. Vulnerable Territorians will face legalised discrimination in employment. People who experience vilification, harassment or hate speech will find it harder to seek justice. Teachers and other staff in faith-based schools could face restrictions on their identity, their speech, even their private lives. Public confidence in the law and in government will erode. By moving to this incitement-only model, the government is pretending that there is a trade-off where none exists. In reality, weakening protections does not create more freedom. It creates more fear and insecurity for those already vulnerable. It tells Territorians, especially people of minority faiths, people with disability, 𝙿𝘼𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙑+ people, that their dignity, safety and equality matters less than the comfort of those who wish to discriminate. This is where courageous leadership is required. Anti-discrimination laws are, by their nature, counter-majoritarian. They exist precisely because vulnerable minorities need protection from majority prejudice and powerful interests. They tell the majority, you cannot treat people unfairly just because you outnumber them. They tell powerful interests, you cannot abuse your power just because you have it. Maintaining and strengthening these protections requires courage precisely because this can be unpopular. It requires a government to say, even if this costs us votes, even if powerful groups oppose it, we will protect those who cannot protect themselves. This is what leadership looks like. This bill does the opposite. It weakens protections where they are needed most. It responds to powerful lobbying rather than protecting vulnerable Territorians. It chooses political expediency over principle. Madam Speaker, this is not an either-or. Protecting people from harm is not the enemy of free expression. It is the very purpose of law to ensure that freedom is responsible, is safe and is inclusive. The current Northern Territory anti-discrimination law already strikes a careful and considered balance. It allows free expression while protecting individuals and communities from serious harm. The harm-based model does not prevent people from speaking their minds. It prevents people from offending, humiliating or intimidating others based on attributes like race, religion, sexuality or gender. So I urge every member of this Assembly to stand for fairness and equality, to do our jobs as leaders and protect the most vulnerable in our community. Reject this bill and make sure that we can build the Northern Territory as a place where all people can live, work and participate without fear of discrimination. Madam Speaker, we are here to represent all Territorians, not just the majority, not just the powerful. This is about rights, dignity and the Territory we want to be. I oppose this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any other speakers? In closing, Minister. Oh.
Sorry.
I don't know.
Sorry, I was going back and forth. I thought someone from the...
Member for Nightcliff, would you like to speak? Yes.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker now, not acting anymore. Okay. Sorry, I wasn't quite ready yet, but I am now. Madam Speaker, I do rise today to speak in strong condemnation of these changes. It took years of hard work for the Northern Territory to get anti-discrimination laws that were up to scratch with the rest of Australia, and now the CLP wants to take that away. The Northern Territory's anti-discrimination laws are currently some of the best in the country. When they were introduced, they were described as visionary. They are in line with the community's expectations and in line with relevant Commonwealth legislation. And the NT's very own Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, whose job it is to provide independent advice on discrimination, said that the Anti-Discrimination Commission did not recommend these changes. He said, and I quote, "Our recommendations were, number one, to retain the current version of Section 20A and 20B, and number two, not to revive or reenact Section 37A," end quote. But today the CLP government is charging ahead with their plan to weaken hate speech protections and reopen the door to discrimination in religious schools. The CLP says that these changes are required to protect freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But all these changes achieve is to give legitimacy to certain types of discrimination. Over the past year, we have repeatedly heard the CLP will put the rights of victims over the rights of offenders. But in this instance, they're putting the right for some in our community to engage in discrimination above the rights of others in our community to be safe from discrimination. Under these changes, we will see more division, more hate targeted at First Nations Territorians, queer Territorians, culturally and linguistically diverse Territorians, Territorians with a disability, and so many others. I stand in solidarity with our diverse communities in opposing this bill. In the new Section 35B, the CLP is going to allow religious institutions to discriminate on the ground of religious belief or activity when employing people and determining how employees conduct themselves at those institutions. Now, in 2022, the CLP heavily criticised Labor Party for removing the religious exemptions before the federal parliament had completed its review into religious educational institutions and anti-discrimination laws. In 2022, the Chief Minister at the time, Leah Finocchiaro, she wasn't Chief Minister, said that if she was in power, she would be considering what the Australian Law Reform Commission, the ALRC, advises the federal government to make sure the balance is right so that there is true equity under the law. But, Madam Speaker, the ALRC has released its findings and the Finocchiaro government is absolutely not taking these recommendations into consideration here today, despite that commitment being given by Mrs Finocchiaro in 2022. By the looks of this bill, the NT government mustn't have even read the report. So I'll just give a brief summary of some of the key points of that report. First, the ALRC's report, it was recommended that federal legislation is revised to explicitly forbid religious educational institutions from discriminating on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital or relationship status or pregnancy against teachers, all other workers and students and their parents. There is no such provision contained today in the CLP's bill before us today. So let me be clear what this means in plain language. Despite all the misinformation you'll hear from the other side, these changes will allow religious educational institutions to discriminate against people based on their sexuality, gender, marital status or pregnancy status. And the CLP is okay with that. We've heard today in the chamber many examples, but if trying to get it through to the other side. For example, a queer teacher could be fired or denied a promotion simply for mentioning that she has a wife at a staff meeting. A cleaner who is divorced could lose their job because their marital status is deemed to offend religious sensitivities. Second, the ALRC report did indeed find that religious institutions should be able to preference persons of their faith in hiring in order to build and maintain a community of faith. However, the ALRC was explicit in saying that these institutions cannot use this as an excuse to discriminate. The ALRC says that the preferencing of people of the same religion must be in good faith, proportionate and compliant with the Sex Discrimination Act 1984. This is not all consistent at all with the laws the CLP is attempting to pass today. Instead, this government is going to expressly allow discrimination when employing people, simply where the discrimination is on the grounds of religious belief or activity and in good faith to avoid offending the religious sensibilities of a reasonable person of the particular religion. That's a bit of a mouthful, but let me explain in more detail. This is not merely about giving preference to people of the same faith when hiring, which is what we keep hearing from the other side. No one's trying to stop that. This goes beyond that, and these changes permit religious institutions to discriminate against people who may offend the religious sensitivities of a reasonable person of that particular religion. This leaves the door open for a school to not hire a staff member who is part of the LGBTQIA+ community on the basis that their sexual orientation might offend people of that religion. And here's where the hypocrisy becomes crystal clear, Madam Speaker. The CLP wants the freedom to crack homophobic jokes and use slurs without anyone being allowed to take offence. But under this same bill, they're saying that religious institutions can refuse to employ a gay person, not because they're unqualified, not because they can't do the job, but simply because their existence as a gay person might offend someone's religious sensibilities. So let me get this straight. You can't be offended by hate speech in public, but you can be so offended by a gay person's existence that they can't work at your school. The double standard is staggering. It's a classic case of the CLP making one set of rules for themselves and their mates and another set of rules for everyone else. Madam Speaker, the CLP's proposed Section 35B clearly does not address the recommendations of the Australian Law Reform Commission, despite the CLP repeatedly raising the review during the debate over the new legislation in 2022. The new Section 35B introduced by the CLP is far too broad and will open the door to direct discrimination against members of our community, particularly those in the LGBTQIA+ who work in religious institutions. This will apply at all levels of these organisations, from gardeners, cleaners and groundspeoples to our teachers and educators. And I believe the point has been made here before about the remote schools that we have, many of which are religious institutions. We struggle to get teachers. Good luck if you allow them to not hire any more queer people. And sister girls and brother boys and teachers who are dedicated to their craft, but somehow their existence offends religious sensibilities. We should not be allowing that in law. And a final comment on this amendment. In budget estimates earlier this year, the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner revealed that the Commission had not received a single complaint from any religious school indicating they had been negatively impacted by the introduction of Section 35B. Not a single one. So the sector is not asking for it. The Anti-Discrimination Commission did not recommend it. You have to ask, what the hell is motivating the CLP to take this backward step? Seriously, not a single. The law as it stands has not impinged on any religious institution's right to hire who they want to hire. So that argument is a furphy. It doesn't exist. This demonstrates, as I have said before, that this is a hateful government, one that takes pleasure in punching down on minorities. To repeat, there was not a single complaint about how this law as it stands, hindering religious institutions. Not one. They can already do that. So this is simply the CLP taking orders from extremist groups like the Australian Christian Lobby. This is a government void of true direction or vision, that they would rather engage in puerile culture wars than actually govern in the community's best interests. Just like Donald Trump, just like Pauline Hanson, just like Peter Dutton, just like Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, the CLP government is picking on marginalised groups in order to distract the population from the real issues in our community that they are doing absolutely nothing about. The watering down of our anti-discrimination laws is another stunt. Just like the transphobic comments stunt from the Chief Minister earlier this week to distract the public from the real issues facing the Northern Territory, like housing, like healthcare, like climate change, like justice and community safety, like closing the gap. The NT government would have had put their heads together and come up with visionary plans to deal with actual issues, but instead they are wasting this Parliament's time using the sitting of Parliament to weaken our nation-leading anti-discrimination laws. The CLP is also here today to weaken the hate speech laws in Anti-Discrimination Act. The CLP, give me one moment. The Attorney-General has said that weakening Section 20A is required to, quote, remove clear, vague terms introduced by Labor, such as offend and insult, and replace them with a clearer standard that focuses on real harm. However, Section 20A is not unclear, vague or inconsistent when it is modelled on Commonwealth legislation, and there are clear parameters for the interpretation of the wording based on existing case law in the federal courts. So let me explain what this change actually means in everyday language. Currently, the law says it's unlawful to do something in public that would offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate someone based on who they are, their race, disability, sexuality, gender and so on. The CLP wants to raise the bar so high that the conduct is only unlawful if it incites hatred, serious harm, contempt or severe ridicule. It means that a lot of harmful behaviour that currently isn't okay will suddenly be okay again. So here's what it looks like in real life. Under the current law, if someone repeatedly calls a person with an intellectual disability slurs or mocks someone using a wheelchair, that's unlawful because it humiliates and insults. Under the CLP's changes, unless that conduct is so severe it incites others to hatred or severe ridicule, it might not be covered anymore. This means that people with disabilities will have less protection from everyday harassment and mockery that makes their lives harder. Shame on you. Sections 20A and 20B of the Anti-Discrimination Act, as introduced by NT Labor in 2022, is also here today to weaken the hate speech laws in Anti-Discrimination Act. The CLP, sorry, give me one moment. The Attorney-General has said that weakening Section 20A is required to, quote, remove clear, vague terms introduced by Labor, such as offend and insult, and replace them with a clearer standard that focuses on real harm. However, Section 20A is not unclear, vague or inconsistent when it is modelled on Commonwealth legislation, and there are clear parameters for the interpretation of the wording based on existing case law in the federal courts. So, let me explain what this change actually means in everyday language. Currently, the law says it's unlawful to do something in public that would offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate someone based on who they are, their race, disability, sexuality, gender and so on. The CLP wants to raise the bar so high that the conduct is only unlawful if it incites hatred, serious harm, contempt or severe ridicule. It means that a lot of harmful behaviour that currently isn't okay will suddenly be okay again. So here's what it looks like in real life. Under the current law, if someone repeatedly calls a person with an intellectual disability slurs or mocks someone using a wheelchair, that's unlawful because it humiliates and insults. Under the CLP's changes, unless that conduct is so severe it incites others to hatred or severe ridicule, it might not be covered anymore. This means that people with disabilities will have less protection from everyday harassment and mockery that makes their lives harder. Shame on you. Sections 20A and 20B of the Anti-Discrimination Act, as introduced by NT Labor in 2022, are modelled on Sections 18C and 18D of the Commonwealth Racial Discrimination Act. There is substantial case precedent dealing with the interpretation and applications of Section 18C and 18D of the Racial Discrimination Act. The courts have consistently interpreted sections of 18C and 18D as maintaining a balance between freedom of speech and freedom from racial vilification. The ALRC made no recommendations to change these laws following its review from last year. The Attorney-General has also said that the current wording in Section 20A allows people to take legal action just because they found something offensive and drag you through a complaints process, or as we heard at budget estimates, if they're offended by a glass of water. However, the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner has made it clear that this is not the case, because an objective legal test is applied to determine whether conduct can be considered offensive. Further, while the Commission has received 46 complaints under the new vilification provision since it came into effect in 2023, only 3 have been accepted. 3 out of 46. Doesn't sound like loads of people are getting dragged through an unnecessary complaints process to me, but hey, we know the Attorney-General doesn't like getting the truth get in the way of a good story. Let's be absolutely clear about something else. No one is getting in trouble for casual jokes between mates. The bar for what constitutes vilification under the current law is actually quite high. It has to be a public act, not a private conversation. So this side needs to stop misleading the public about that. It has to be something that would reasonably be considered offensive by an ordinary person, not just someone who's overly sensitive. And it has to be because someone has a protected attribute. 2 friends making jokes at the park, not covered. Mates having banter at the pub, not covered. Although I do have to say, if your friends are casually making homophobic and racist jokes, maybe you should get some new friends and look in the mirror. This law is about serious public harassment and abuse, the kind that makes people feel unsafe in their own community. CLP has done nothing but fearmonger in relation to hate speech laws, and they have tried to make it out like everyday Territorians are being punished under them. To try and oppose the introduction of these laws back in 2022, CLP ministers made it out that the Territory way of life was going to walk out the door and that no one could make any more jokes in the pub anymore. We heard the deputy back then, during those changes, Mr Maley said, under these changes, telling a joke in the pub could see you hauled up before the Anti-Discrimination Commission because the jokes could offend something. We heard Member for Catherine say at the time, the bill changes the definition of discrimination to anything that causes offence. This will be a boon for lawyers and lobby groups as offence-taking launches a slew of legal cases. And we heard the Chief Minister at the time say, we are talking about jokes at the pub and iconic activities that happen in the Northern Territory, like the croc races at Berry Springs Tavern. Some of those crocs have interesting names that our grandmothers probably wouldn't be happy about, but generally speaking, in good humour. Now, if someone does not, it could be a problem. It could be an action before the Anti-Discrimination Commission. Madam Speaker, those melodramatic wailings from those on the other side have proved entirely false. Three cases got through. The passage of time has demonstrated that those ludicrous predictions painted by the CLP have not happened under this current law. No one is being thrown before the Anti-Discrimination Commission for naming a crock at Berry Springs Tavern. Chats among mates at the pubs have not changed. There has been no great benefit to lobby groups and lawyers when the only recourse from these lawyers is a conciliatory process before the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner. Where the 2022 changes to the Anti-Discrimination Act have not had the effect the CLP painted, which is evidenced by the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner himself, there is no valid reason to walk them back now. While the CLP has attempted to repaint their reasons for weakening these hate speech laws under the guise of them being unclear or vague, it's clear that this reasoning is simply untrue. If we repeal Section 20A, the NT will be the only jurisdiction in Australia where our residents are not protected from vilification at all. Vilification laws are essential because they are preventative. They help prevent more serious discrimination and violence down the track. And at this point, I want to bring in some of the comments we've heard from the Chief Minister in recent days about trans women. The comments about trans women being equipped as men and that they don't belong in men's prisons. Do you know, Madam Speaker, who in our community is statistically the most likely to suffer physical and sexual violence? Trans people. And do you know who trans women are most in danger from? Men, cisgender men, or men who are born as men who live as men. Putting trans women in men's prisons is unbelievably dangerous and inappropriate. And the hypocrisy of the Chief Minister and those on the other side to pretend that they have this stance for women's safety in prison. This is the Chief Minister and the government who are locking women up at unprecedented rates in overcrowded, unhygienic prisons, transferring women 1,500 kilometres away from their families so they can't see their children anymore. How dare you pretend to give a shit about women in prison? You are simply using this as a sick opportunity to punch down on trans people. The Chief Minister has confected this culture war in order to distract Territorians from the real threat to women in Territory's prisons, which is overcrowding, underinvestment and the lack of alternatives to imprisonment and systemic racism in our so-called justice system. Madam Speaker, the CLP's changes to the Anti-Discrimination Act are going to have a real and detrimental impact on the safety and well-being of people in our community. I have spoken with a trans man living in Darwin who can feel the anti-trans rhetoric in the last month, as this debate has been going on, rise in our community. And the stripping back of vilification laws will make him and other trans people more vulnerable in public places. I've spoken with a queer teacher who had finally felt that they had the ability to be their full self at work without fear of losing the job, but that now changes. If the CLP wants to change anything in the Anti-Discrimination Act, I would suggest that they stand by their own word and incorporate the ALRC's recommendation into the religious exemption laws. Apologies. If I had seen any evidence of the members from the Country Law Party that had a shred of compassion, human decency or common sense, I'd be appealing to that. I'd be imploring them to find that within themselves and not make these changes. I would ask the CLP and every member sitting in here today to stand by vulnerable people in our community and keep the current vilification laws, which are fair, balanced and provide reasonable protections to people in public spaces. But every bit of evidence I've seen here over the past 12 months, every word uttered by them in this chamber, every social media post, everything said on radio, has demonstrated to me that once again, this is an ignorant, hateful government that is not and never will act in the best interests of our community. This is a sad day for the Territory that this act is taking place. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Arafura.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government has brought forward the amendments to the Anti-Discrimination Act 1992 with two key changes. First, they are amending the Section 20A under Labor's 2023 reforms, and Section A prohibited offensive conduct in public acts that were responsibly likely to offend, insult, humiliate, or intimidate another person because of their race, sexuality, gender, disability, religion, and other protected attribute. These protections meant Territorians had real recourse if they were publicly degraded for simply being who they are. The CLP is stripping these protections out. They want to remove, offend, insult, humiliate, or intimidate, and replace it with a model that requires proof that conduct incites hatred, serious contempt, or severe ridicule. This is what they call a higher threshold. But let's be clear, it is simply making it easier for people to discriminate against others. It narrows the law so much that people are subjected to acts of vilification, the kind that would wound deeply, but may not rise to outright incitement of hate. We'll have no recourse against this kind of behaviour. It utterly limits Territorians' access to justice. In doing so, the CLP is taking the Northern Territory out of step with the Commonwealth's own Racial Discrimination Act, Section 18C. Of that act still prohibits offensive and insulting behaviour on racial grounds. Every other jurisdiction is moving forward on the stronger protections. The Territory is being dragged backwards. Second, the government is inserting a new section, 35B. This will allow faith-based schools to refuse to employ someone because they do not share the same religion. It provides religious schools the freedom to require certain conduct from staff in line with particular religious doctrines. That could apply not just teachers, but also administration staff, gardeners, cleaners, anyone employed by the school. Now this will definitely affect one of my communities in Warramiyanga. We have the Maraputianu Catholic Primary School. It's the only school at Bathurst Island. Now, if people do not fall in line with their children in regards to the faith, and we are not all of us are religious, right? What happens to those children? That's the big concern that I have with this little amendment, or big amendment for my people. Madam Speaker, religious schools have every right to uphold their faith, but let us think about what this means in a real world. In many small and remote communities across the Territory, in the remote areas, where there are only farm and cattle stations, the only school available is hundreds of kilometres from the nearest school. The options are limited. If you are a qualified teacher or simply a local person looking for work, and if you do not share that particular faith, what happens to you? Do you need to go to an urban centre? You know, we've got a lot of Indigenous teachers, teacher aides that are working at schools. That is not fairness, that is not inclusivity. That is discrimination written into law. Madam Speaker, these changes may look like a technical legal tweak. They are not. They are a fundamental shift in values underpinning our laws. They are a shameful move away from protections for some of our most vulnerable community members. When Labor modernised the Anti-Discrimination Act in 2023, we did so after an extensive consultation with communities, legal experts, health organisations, with people living with disability, with multicultural and faith groups, with LGBTQIA+ Territorians. The reform were about recognising the discrimination that takes many forms and that words can wound. As the then Attorney General said at the time, these changes are important for those who have suffered inequalities based on race, gender, culture, disabilities, and a range of other factors, such as sexuality and age. Discrimination law is an evolving area, and it is important that Northern Territory keeps up to the date are up to date with modern values and expectations. These new laws will help to close the divide on inequality for future generations. That was the vision, and that was leadership. And now, less than 2 years later, the CLP wants to tear it down. They say they are restoring freedom, but when asked, they cannot name a single freedom that Territorians have lost under the current law. Not one. What they are doing is protecting hate speech. They are choosing to stand with keyboard warriors who want to insult and denigrate rather than with the Territorians who deserve dignity. At a time when we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism, in Islamophobia, in racial abuse, in homophobia, transphobia, in the scapegoating of people with disability and minority groups. I mean, the example was a few weeks ago. You know, when Senator Price, targeted one multicultural group. And I'm very disappointed in the multicultural minister. Should be defending his constituents, but puts up a photo with the senator and defends her. This bill also fits in the troubling pattern we are seeing from the CLP government. Over and over again, when experts raise concerns, whether they are paediatricians, police associations, Aboriginal legal services, or community leaders, the government's instinct is to attack them, to dismiss them, to say, if you don't like it, leave. If you don't like it, leave to Aboriginal people. Ask more from here. We saw it when paediatricians dared to raise concerns about youth justice changes. The Chief Minister's response was to lash out and try and silence them. We saw it yesterday when the Chief Minister said, the opposition leader, you're wrong and I'm right. And that's just the way it is. That's a song.
Great song.
And we are seeing it again today, with these amendments brought forward without genuine consultation, without listening to those most affected. This government seems to believe it knows better than the people living in the realities of every day. We should be celebrating our differences. We should be learning from each other. It reveals a government with no answers, no solutions, and no respect for Territorian voices. Madam Speaker, the Labor opposition is clear. We will vote against this bill. We will not support a 1960s model bill. We support freedom of religion. We support people's right to express their faith and live fully. But we also support the right of every Territorian to be treated equally, whether you are a teacher, a nurse, a cleaner, a gardener, gay or straight, transgender, a person with disability, Indigenous or non-Indigenous. We need to be all in the same classroom to learn and tolerate each other, not separate each other through religion. Youths, these are kids we're talking about. We are narrowing their scope in acceptance of other peoples. That's where it's born. That's where we're going to create hate. We support public debate. Territorians can and should have different opinions, but no one should be publicly insulted, humiliated, or degraded because of who they are. That is not debate, that is hate, and Labor will not support the laws that encourage it. We support a strong, independent anti-discrimination commission that can help Territorians navigate the system and ensure fairness. This Parliament now faces a choice. Do we want the Northern Territory to be a place that embraces diversity and protects the vulnerable and says clearly, you're welcome here, wherever you are? Or do we want to send the opposite message? That is the open season for discrimination. Give them an inch, they go a mile. That if you are different, you are on your own. That a government will stand by while you are vilified, so long as someone claims they are exercising freedom of speech. Madam Speaker, I know what side Territory Labor is on. We're on the side of Territorians, on the side of diversity. We listen to you whether you vote for us or not. We will stand up for your right to live with dignity, freedom, and discrimination, and free from discrimination, free from fear, and free from hate. This bill is not about protecting freedoms. It is about protecting prejudice. It is about opening the door to more hate speech, more division, and fewer safeguards for people, the vulnerable people that need it the most. At a time when our communities are asking for leadership on safety, on jobs, on housing, on health, on maternity services. This is not what Territorians want. It is not what Territorians deserve. The opposition will not support this bill. We will stand with every Territorian. No one should be left behind, and no one should be held back because of who they are. That is the future Labor will fight for. That is the vision we offer, a territory that is strong, inclusive, fair, and forward-looking. Madam Speaker, we reject this regressive, divisive legislation. We call on the government to stop playing politics with people's rights and start listening to the territory. Thank you.
Are there any more speakers? Opposition Leader.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, here in the Territory, we proudly celebrate our diversity and inclusiveness. These are incredibly precious qualities that should be protected at all costs. We believe that every single Territorian deserves to live free from discrimination, harassment and persecution. We believe it is un-Territorian to criticise or vilify someone because of their colour, their race, their gender, their sexuality, their age, their disability. This is not who we are as a people across the Territory or who we want to be when it comes to being discriminated. But we would be living in a fantasy land, Madam Speaker, if we didn't think that some Territorians are subjected to this sort of behaviour because of who they are or because of a particular attribute, which is why it is so important that we, as a Northern Territory Parliament, as elected representatives of the Northern Territory, ensure that we are upholding and protecting what our community values most about the Territory. And we believe this bill does the opposite. It strips away protections from some of the most vulnerable people in our community, sends a message to those who seek to vilify fellow Territorians that it's okay to do so, and to do so publicly and openly, at a time, Madam Speaker, when hate speech across the country is on the rise, at a time which we have seen, Madam Speaker, just recently, within the last few weeks, when racism is on the rise, when Senator Justine Davis, CLP Senator of the Northern Territory, stomped down on the NT's Indian community in her misguided and misinformed and rubbish comments about migration, at a time when people are marching through the cities, in our big towns, in our big centres, protesting against the thousands of Territorians who have come here from other countries to make Australia their home. Madam Speaker, it is unbelievable that this sort of thing is happening across our community in this day and age. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, it is. And these attitudes of division and hate are being enabled by the sitting CLP government. And it is unbelievable, Madam Speaker, but that's what's happening. The most recent example just this week, when the Chief Minister decided to use trans women as a political football to distract from questions about her own integrity and her team's integrity. It is the dirtiest trick in the book, Madam Speaker, but our Chief Minister went there because that is who she is in her lack of leadership. Divisive, immature and nasty to anyone who dares to speak out about making the Territory better. Chief Minister's attitude, my way or the highway. Listen or shut up. That is not what people expect about a leader, Madam Speaker. Through these amendments that are before the House, the CLP government is making it easier to insult, humiliate and intimidate Territorians or groups of Territorians just because they are different race, because they may be gay, because they have a disability or because of their gender. That is the signal the government is sending to our community. It is completely and utterly unacceptable, Madam Speaker. It panders to a small minority in our community who seek to peddle hate, then dress it up as freedom of speech. The freedom argument is appalling, and it is nonsense, Madam Speaker. The current legislation is something that enables freedom of speech, and it is there in black and white in the current legislation. It always has been. Meanwhile, the CLP opposite can't name a single right or freedom that is actually being curtailed as a result of the amendments that were made by our former Labor government, which were brought in to protect Territorians against discrimination and vilification. The Northern Territory's Attorney-General has been questioned time and time again about an example that she can provide about why and how this legislation needs to be changed. And she still cannot provide that example, Madam Speaker, because the CLP is just making these amendments because they want to shift shame and create culture wars. What they are about, Madam Speaker, is enabling and empowering a small minority of people to incite hatred, to ridicule, to vilify other Territorians or groups of Territorians just for being who they are. And it is a disgrace, Madam Speaker. It is deeply regressive step and deeply offensive to the many Territorians who have come before this place to make it better and stronger together. Every other jurisdiction has strong protections in place against this sort of behaviour, Madam Speaker, and here we are in the Northern Territory seeing the CLP try and walk the Territory backwards, back to the old Stone Age, because that's who we know was the mentor for the CLP, Madam Speaker. And I know that the CLP government has absolute contempt for nearly every single stakeholder group across the Northern Territory. Anyone who dares to raise criticism or concern is shot down in flames and called nasty names, like a nasty school bully in the playground, Madam Speaker, which actually makes you wonder and think, whose right is it to insult? Whose right is it to intimidate? And whose right is it to vilify? And why is the government thinking that these rights are above the fellow Territorians' rights of protecting from discrimination? But regardless, Madam Speaker, many individuals and groups continue to bravely speak out against the retrograde actions of this CLP shallow, mean-spirited and small-minded, visionless government, even though they know that there are potential consequences in doing so under their proposed regime. Madam Speaker, I'll give voice to a number of those brave Territorians today. First of all, the person who is tasked with administrating and interpreting this very act, the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, had this to say, and I quote, "The Commission is disappointed, but not surprised that the government has chosen to roll back protections that took decades to build. These amendments do not restore balance, they strip away rights and undermine the very purpose of anti-discrimination law, equality of opportunity. The Act is beneficial legislation. It exists to protect the marginalised, uphold fairness and set the standards of equality. These changes instead preference particular groups and misinform them about how anti-discrimination law actually works, embedding division and legitimising discrimination. I acknowledge that the government has compromised on this provision, and rather than repealing the section altogether, they have made the threshold much higher. However, these changes are not about protecting free speech or reducing the Commission's workload. They are about creating carve-outs that could enable hate speech, weakening vilification laws at a time of rising anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and racial hate, sends wrong message about whose safety the law values," end quote. Madam Speaker, Equality Australia Legal Director Heather Corkhill said this, quote, "We know from experiences in other states that incitement-based legal test is completely ineffective against even some of the worst kinds of hate speech. At a time when hate is increasing around the country, including the mobilisation of far-right groups like neo-Nazis, we should be strengthening protections, not weakening them. It's a profound relief that under this legislation, religious schools cannot discriminate on the grounds of sexuality or gender identity, only on the basis of a person's religious belief or activity. However, imposing a single view of religious doctrines on all staff, even cleaners or receptionists, who have no role in religious teaching, opens the door to discrimination against 𝙏𝙼𝙈𝙀𝙎+ people and silences those who support them in our school communities, end quote. Madam Speaker, Ella Waters, the Assistant Secretary of the Australian Services Union, or the ASU, across the South Australia and Northern Territory branch, a union that represents members of the transport industry, the energy industry, the IT industry, community services sector, officer workers and many more in our community, said this, and I quote, "Territory workers deserve strong protections, but the CLP's legislation takes us backwards, weakening vital safeguards and leaving workers exposed to hate speech and discrimination. Instead of building on reform that makes the Territory a leader in fairness, these changes risk undoing hard-won progress and would leave workers more vulnerable in their workplaces. Our current laws reflect years of effort to create safer and more respectful workplaces and communities. We will continue to stand with our members to protect fairness and respect and to ensure Territorians are protected from hate speech and discrimination," end quote. Madam Speaker, Sally Sievers, the CEO of Northern Territory Council of Social Services, said this, and I quote, "The previous Act was the result of decades of work by everyday Territorians. The process to get to these proposed changes has been opaque, confusing and not genuine consultation. The existing model of vilification sets a very high bar that has not been used frivolously. There is no evidence to indicate the need for a new model, nor that the proposed incite hatred model will be effective in addressing the vilification experienced by people in our community. These changes to the Anti-Discrimination Act will leave Territorians less safe. We need to protect what we've built together," end quote. Madam Speaker, this is merely a handful of individuals and organisations who have spoken out against the proposed retrograde laws that the CLP government is championing. There are many more in our community who've reached out to us in the opposition, who've spoken to us about their concerns, who have asked us when this legislation comes about to fight hard against it, who do not support these changes of amendments because the likely impact of these changes on some of the Territory's most vulnerable and marginalised in our community will be big. And because of the message it sends about the kind of community we are as the Territory will be degrading, Madam Speaker. And I know that there are many members in the CLP government who are, I suspect, deeply uncomfortable about these changes. And let me say this, Madam Speaker, so they should be. It is a shame that they are not brave enough to voice their own views and opinions, as we have seen other elected members, officials and community members do. Madam Speaker, the CLP also intends to pass a number of other amendments making it legal for religious schools to deny someone a job because they don't share the same religious belief or activity. While our Territory Labor opposition team believes that our religious schools should have the ability to uphold, teach and enshrine their religious beliefs and values, we are concerned that discriminating against a potential employee, even cleaners and gardeners in a school, on religious grounds is an unnecessary step. Madam Speaker, in this particular case, given that there are already provisions in the current legislation that balance religious freedom and equality, then why, Madam Speaker, why would the CLP mess with this very important law for the Territory? We heard some of those very practical reasons and examples, real examples from the member for Arafura just a moment ago around what this could mean for some of our very remote schools who may only have one option. How will this protect Territorians in those workplaces, Madam Speaker? Again, something that the CLP government cannot answer, refuse to answer and will not answer. Madam Speaker, since the former Labor government wound back religious discrimination exemptions from the legislation, there has not been a single instant in where this has been proposed as an issue, for any of our Territory religious schools, Madam Speaker. Just think about that for a moment. That's one of their key arguments in saying why they are doing this change to the legislation. Not a single instance of communicating this part of the exemptions as an issue. Not a single one. Madam Speaker, our Territory Labor team believes that these amendments will indeed set the Territory community back, open the floodgates to hate speech and signal that it is acceptable to discriminate against and to vilify against fellow Territorians based on their personal attributes. And Madam Speaker, that is one of the key reasons that makes this so personal for many Territorians. Those attributes, those things we hold dear to us as our identity, that we are fiercely protective of, who we identify, that makes us part of the communities that we gravitate towards, the communities that support us, the communities that accept us across the Northern Territory. Those attributes that are protected in the current legislation, it will make it much more difficult for people to be able to access because of the threshold going higher, be able to access and make those complaints through the Commission and to be fully heard and to see a natural justice process when we talk about discrimination. It is those things that become the most hurtful. When someone is vilified because of their race, they're vilified because of their religion, they're vilified because of their gender, they're vilified because of their sexuality. When people are vilified for their personal attributes, their identity is crushed. Their identity becomes something that is seen in a bad light. That is truly what becomes the most hurtful part of discrimination in a Territory community that values diversity, that values all of those personal attributes, that values the connection of the community fabric that makes us the beautiful and unique Territory that we all know and love. So then why water down those protections, Madam Speaker? That is not an answer we have heard clearly from the CLP government. We have not heard those examples. We have not been given those numbers around why this is an issue. So, Madam Speaker, we conclude that this is what the CLP wants. They want to see a community divided, not united. They want to see our community fighting each other so then they can hide off in the limelight, not do their job and not protect Territorians, not keep Territorians protected by this legislation because they changed the rules, they changed the goalposts, so therefore they don't have to care in the same way as what they should do right now, Madam Speaker. This has been a huge journey in previous years of this parliament, and it continues to be a saga because the CLP government chooses to play politics with people's rights in the Territory rather than focus on the vision that they promised Territorians over a year ago that they would deliver, they would develop and that they would work on. It's a deflection, Madam Speaker, of true leadership. It is a deflection of their true responsibilities of fellow Territorians to protect their rights, their human rights and those personal attributes to be protected. And it is an absolute stain on the Northern Territory's legislative history that will come today should this bill pass, Madam Speaker. This is why our Territory Labor opposition will not be voting for this amendment. We will absolutely be voting against these changes, and I would encourage anyone who is on the other side in the government who does not support this big change to the Territory and reducing those protection rights for Territorians to really consider their position well, because their names will be against the changes and why they've been made. Will they be able to go out to their community, to their electorates, explain to their family, friends, former colleagues of why this legislation was so important to make these changes to reduce and to water down protections of fellow Territorians? Will they be able to do that? Will they be able to look Territorians in the eye and explain the very need, the purpose and the extent of why changes in the Territory of such a progressive and high-level legislation that other jurisdictions have looked to duplicate, why they are now winding back those protections here in the Territory? Have they been able to do that with their hand on their heart to say that they honestly, truly believe and back what the Attorney-General is doing in the Territory? Because I highly doubt that the answer is yes, Madam Speaker, and that is one of the biggest shame jobs for the Territory, when we say, oh yes, we love our multicultural community, we love our First Nations people, we love how different and unique the Northern Territory is, but actually all those things that make you who you are and how great you are and how connected you are to your community, we actually really don't believe in protecting those personal attributes. How bizarre and to the contrary is that type of mentality, Madam Speaker? And we heard it from the Chief Minister earlier this week, as I've already mentioned, Madam Speaker, when she said, oh yes, I'm pro-trans, but by the way, our policy has changed. But no, that no one can find a change in the policy. Not even the Corrections Minister can back up his Chief Minister and show us a document that says that they've provided changes. So they like saying one thing, they don't like doing the hard work, and when experts and community advocates question, they get shot down. When they raise concerns, they are ignored, the door is shut, they do not get a hearing with the government. And then, to the contrary, when someone really annoys the government, they get personally attacked, not because of their expertise, not because of their key points that they raise, that they're concerned about government policies or program or funding, or what the government's been really good at doing is cutting funding. They get personally attacked in a mean girl sense, Madam Speaker, and I say that because I've mostly heard it from the Chief Minister, from the Member for Katherine, from the Attorney-General, and that tends to be the default. And in this place, you know, we have a bit of fun, we have interjections, we have a bit of banter, but at the end of the day, I hope that everyone continues to be respectful. But we have seen it out in the open, out in the public, in the media, in responses to questions from the community, in responses to questions from our media outlets. This horrible shutting down, deflection, and real disregard for fellow Territorians, thinking that they know better than the experts, that they know better than someone else's personal experience around discrimination, that the government is the be-all and end-all. It's absolute rubbish, Madam Speaker. There is no humility in the way that the government is doing business. There is no respect for fellow Territorians, although they propose to represent all Territorians, which we know is absolutely not true. They have taken the years and years and years of careful, considered work around our Northern Territory Discrimination Act and basically spat on it. They have disrespected and disregarded all of the work over the years, and purely because of that mean girl attitude by their leader, have ripped up what was done, all the years of consultation work, amendments, changes, to get us to where we have the current legislation today, all because they think that they're better than everyone else outside of here. Or, of course, what would we know? We're just other members of Parliament. We don't know anything. So this derogatory, mean girl mentality has continued on through the Parliament, through the government, and it makes me feel like the next 3 years, if they continue with the mean girl leader, the next 3 years will show Territorians how much of a lack of regard that the CLP truly have for the Northern Territory. They say they love the Territory, they wear their little badges every day, that's their little uniform they've got to do, that's fine. They've got to wear their bowling outfits out and about in the community with their faces on the back in case anyone forgets what they look like. But the disregard for Territorians and saying that they are going to listen and they are going to implement. Well, actually, that's probably not true. They've never said they'll implement anything they listen to. They've just said, we'll be out and about, and apparently if you don't like what we say, leave. If you don't like what we do, leave. And there they are, oh, there's all these people coming back to the Territory because the CLP is the saviour of the Northern Territory. Oh, but if you don't like us, just leave. We don't care about you. So disrespectful, Madam Speaker, that mentality. So I do acknowledge and thank the many advocates, the many community members who have spoken to our Labor team, who have met with us when we held roundtables to specifically understand what people wanted to question, raise concerns, provide response around this legislation. I thank those people from the bottom of my heart, Madam Speaker, because they gave up their valuable time to be able to share their thoughts, their concerns, their questions about this very important piece of territory legislation, Madam Speaker. And it wouldn't have been easy because we know that particularly our non-government organisations, their time is precious. They have limited resources, limited human resources, and limited time in the day to do all the other amazing things they do to service the Northern Territory, but to then have to spend their time, spend their skill set, to spend their efforts in having to raise concerns about a move that the government is making for no apparent real reason. It's quite phenomenal, Madam Speaker. But I do thank those advocates, those community groups, those experts, the people who I've quoted, those people who have gone out and advocated in their own way against this bill that the CLP is bringing before the House. We do appreciate your insights, your time, your energy, your effort, your skills to be able to provide that full insight into the debate that is before the House today. And it's been interesting, Madam Speaker, listening to the contributions of each member so far in this debate, and they're respecting, obviously people have different views, which is always a positive, but I think that when people, the government of the day thinks that their views are more important than other views of Territorians, then we start to get into a very, very dangerous area where we see the government continue to pick and choose the voices or the ideas or the concerns that are raised, and they close the door off to everyone else. I think it shows, again, a very dangerous and slippery slope of governing, and I'll probably on deaf ears, Madam Speaker, but like to remind the CLP that when you become the Northern Territory government, you are the government for the Northern Territory. So you are the government for the whole of the territory. You are the government for people who may not have elected you, who may not have put you in that number 1 box, but you have to govern for the whole of the Northern Territory, not just pick and choose the people or the groups that you represent in this place. The Northern Territory government's duty is to govern the whole of the Northern Territory and represent all Territorians across a range of views at multiple times, doing multiple responsibilities. And we are seeing the government post-box things. We're seeing the government with their tunnel vision. We're seeing the government not being flexible, agile, in being able to represent Territorians and do more than one thing at one time when it comes to really important issues like the Anti-Discrimination Bill of the Northern Territory. So, Madam Speaker, our team will not be supporting this bill. The government continues to fail in providing those examples of why this very important act of the Northern Territory should be changed at all. And we heard some very hopeless examples try to be plucked out of thin air from the Attorney-General during the estimates. And what's that, June, July, August, September, October, 4 months ago, and she still cannot come up with a single example of why this bill should be amended, like not a single one. I would caution Territorians in thinking that this is just a blip, because what we've seen so far in the last 13 months of the CLP government is a continued pattern of bad behaviour when it comes to lawmaking. Why did, and I would love the Attorney-General to answer this question, if she wants to ignore everything else I've said, I would love her to answer this one question that I have right now. Madam Speaker, when it comes to the Anti-Discrimination Amendment Bill, why did the Attorney-General seek to make the changes, and how will this make Territorians' protection better in law when it comes to discrimination? So please, if we could get an answer, because it failed for over 4 months, even longer than that, but definitely over the last 4 months, to provide examples and reasons for this very change. So if we can come up with, rather than, you know, a water glass example or a backyard barbecue, which we know doesn't come into the legislative framework of what currently is counted under the examples that have been tried to desperately be made in the past. I would love to know the answer to that very important question, because Territorians ask us, we ask the government, and the government continues to bury their head in the sand and to completely ignore that very important part of being open and transparent and accountable for their decisions and their actions. So if we have an Attorney-General who is doing her job properly, she will be able to provide us with those important answers, so it can be here on the record for forevermore on Hansard, so we can understand. We may not agree, but we can understand. But right now, we have no idea why the government is going down this track, other than they're opening the gates to further hate speech and discrimination in the Northern Territory.
Member for Katherine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise today to speak on the Anti-Discrimination Amendment Bill 2025. But I just want to pick up on some of the comments of the opposition leader. And first of all, I was pretty sure I heard, and what a disgrace she was, in referring to the Chief Minister as a Nazi. Like, that is, talk about offensive. That is extremely offensive that she even uses that language in here under her privilege or whatever she wants to do. The fact is, we are 17 members of a team that are not dictated to. We all have our own expressions, and we all put in our own input, and the fact that she comes out with that absolute rubbish...
Could you pause, please, Member for Katherine? What's your point of order, Member for...
Standing Order 31, offensive. I think the Member for Katherine has misquoted me in saying that I called the Chief Minister a Nazi. I did not say that at all, and I would like her to withdraw, because that's an imputation, and I have never said that about the Chief Minister. So the Member for Katherine, Madam Speaker, should not make up things on the record, and she should be accountable for her words, and she should withdraw that imputation, because I never said that, so she should not be lying about me.
Okay, take your seat, Opposition Leader. We had this incident earlier this afternoon where someone thought that someone said something, and in that situation, under the Deputy Speaker's instruction, the member was asked to withdraw, and we will check Hansard if you want, and refer to it later.
Hansard, and I'm not sure what she was referring to then. If when Hansard comes back and it is that she has not said that, Madam Speaker, I absolutely withdraw, but I would
ask you to withdraw now, Member for Katherine, because otherwise it can escalate and...
Well, I did think it was quite unusual, Opposition Leader, so if you did not say that, I do withdraw.
Okay, stop the interjections, please. Member for Katherine,
I withdraw, Madam
advise
Speaker.
You to withdraw.
Thank you.
And we will ask for a rush on what the Opposition Leader said, and if in fact she said what you think she said, we can revisit this later on this evening. Please continue with your speech.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. But, you know, I mean, let's not let the truth get in the...
Can you just pause a minute, sorry?
To ensure that the Member for Katherine did withdraw.
Yes, she did withdraw, Opposition Leader, and she did.
Smiling, so I just want to make sure
Please take your seat. I heard the Member for Katherine withdraw.
The fact that I'm smiling, Madam
Speaker,
Speaker...
can continue her
Thank
speech.
you.
The matter will be resolved when we get the rush from Hansard, and we can check what you actually said and we can revisit it if, in fact, what the member for Katherine thought you said was true.
Thank you,
but
Madam
it's been
Speaker.
withdrawn. End of matter. Please
Thank
continue.
you. And at the end of the day, you know, there were many things that the opposition leader spoke of in her contribution, like let's not let the truth get in the way of a good story. I just think sometimes they have very, very short memories. The amendments that Labor forced through this House in 2022 were nothing short of blatant government overreach. They represented a fundamental shift away from fairness and balance and towards a society where ordinary Territorians could be silenced, judged for expressing their views. In 2022, our CLP opposition opposed these changes at the time, and we stand firmly opposed to them today. What we are doing with this bill is delivering on another election commitment. And I want to just reaffirm that, Madam Speaker. This was actually an election commitment that we took to the election over a year ago. So we did consult widely, but we also did take it to an election where, you know, people knew what they were actually voting for. And there's a reason why we are here and the opposition is over that side. So this is, as I said, delivering on another election commitment to restore fairness and restore the rights of Territorians to freedom of speech and freedom of religion. These amendments...
Pause, please, Member for Katherine. The members who are talking down the back of the chamber, I can hear you talking. You can go outside or talk a bit more softly in respect to the member for Katherine. Thank you.
These amendments modernise the Anti-Discrimination Act and bring it back into alignment with what Territorians expect, a legal framework that protects against real discrimination and harm, but that doesn't overreach into thought policing or subjective feelings. Importantly, this bill also removes the unnecessary requirement that every complaint must first be assessed by the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner before being referred to the NT-CAT. That bottleneck created confusion, inconsistency and needless delay. By streamlining the process, we ensure that the tribunal, a body set up to properly hear such matters, is the forum where disputes can be resolved fairly and transparently. Madam Speaker, our government continues to support the core objects of the Act and the many attributes that are rightly protected from discrimination in Section 19. These include race, language, sexual orientation, age, relationship status, religious belief and disability. That commitment is unwavering. But in 2022, Labor went further. They inserted Section 20A, a clause that made it unlawful to engage in conduct reasonably likely to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate. Now let's pause and think about that. To offend, to insult, to humiliate, these are entirely subjective terms. And what offends me, Madam Speaker, may not offend you and may not offend somebody else. And we've certainly seen that here in the Parliament. What one person considers insulting may be to another nothing more than a joke or even a fair criticism. Yet Labor handed unelected bureaucrats the sweeping power to decide what was reasonably likely to cause someone to feel insulted or humiliated. This was not balance, this was not fairness, and what it was, though, was government overreach at its worst. This bill fixes that. We are replacing those vague, open-ended terms with a clearer and more robust legal threshold that targets serious harm. Our changes will ensure the law protects Territorians against genuine intimidation and conduct that makes someone fearful or unsafe. It will not allow the weaponisation of feelings to shut down debate or drag someone before a tribunal over a harmless remark. Freedom of speech matters, Madam Speaker. It matters in our schools, in our workplaces and in our homes. It matters for Territorians of every age, background and belief. We promised Territorians before the election that we would restore that freedom, and today we are keeping that promise. In changing the Act in 2022, Labor removed Section 37A, an example given to religious schools, which gave them the right to employ staff who share their faith. By doing so, Labor stripped away the ability of religious schools to uphold their own teachings, values and ethos. That decision disrespected people of faith. It ignored the wishes of parents and it undermined the very foundation of what makes religious schools distinctive. Our bill restores that exemption. Through Section 35B, we are returning to religious schools the certainty they need, the certainty that they can employ people who are aligned with their beliefs without the constant fear of legal action. And I'd just like to point out, Madam Speaker, that Our Lady of the Sacred Heart 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏 Catholic College, which is actually out at 𝙏𝙗𝙈𝙀𝙎, in the member for Daly's area there. In fact, we are helping the member for Daly and his constituents in this area. They are the only school out there for kids to go to school to. The Attorney-General deserves recognition for her extensive consultation in preparing this bill. She is engaged with a broad spectrum of stakeholders, religious schools, the Christian lobby, the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, LGBT organisations, health sector representatives, legal experts and community groups. Every voice has been heard and every perspective considered. Madam Speaker, this is a matter of common sense. A religious school must be able to hire teachers and staff who reflect the values of its community. Whether it is the International Islamic College here in Darwin or one of our many Christian schools, as I've said, the one out at 𝙏𝙗𝙈𝙀𝙎, there are many others across the territory. I have St Joseph's School in my electorate. We have, Lady of the Sacred Heart. There are many religious schools across the territory, and these protections apply equally to all faiths. Parents and families, regardless of their background, deserve the right to choose the kind of educations their children receive, along with religious freedoms. A fundamental human right must be safeguarded. I want to be absolutely clear. These changes do not and will not give schools the right to discriminate on the basis of sexuality or race. What they do is ensure that schools can build communities of staff and students who share a common set of values, ethos and beliefs. In fact, many of the religious schools consulted told us directly that they have no interest in discriminating against people because of their sexuality or gender. What they want, and what this bill restores, is simply the right to employ staff who can genuinely uphold their faith-based teaching. Section 35B also makes it a requirement that schools set out their expectations in a written policy available to all employees and applicants. This ensures that everyone, teachers, parents and prospective staff alike, know exactly where the school stands and what role faith plays within it. Labor's decision to strip these protections left schools exposed. It left them under constant threat of litigation for simply trying to employ someone who matched their values. That is neither fair nor sustainable and is being corrected today. The amendments in Section 35B apply only to religious schools, not to religious institutions generally and not to government schools. When Labor removed these exemptions, they didn't just undermine schools, they discriminated against parents and families' right to choose. Those parents and carers who wanted their children to be educated in line with their religious beliefs were stripped of that choice. Religious schools exist precisely because families want an education grounded in shared values that requires teachers and staff who are committed to the same vision and mission. When Labor made these changes, Mark Spencer from Christian Schools Australia said, and I quote, "Christian schools in the Northern Territory have been thrown to the lions by proposed changes to the Anti-Discrimination Act. People of all faiths and none in the Northern Territory should be very concerned by the government's lack of respect for diversity of belief in a multicultural, multi-faith society." Put simply, Madam Speaker, Labor disrespected people of faith and their right to choose. By contrast, our changes restore protections without taking people's rights away from anyone else. They do not harm the LGBT 𝙏𝙬+ community. They do not weaken existing protections against harassment or vilification, and they do not privilege one faith over another. What they do is restore freedom of choice. They restore fairness and they restore common sense. This is why these reforms have been endorsed by Vanessa Cheng, CEO of the Australian Association of Christian Schools, who applauded our government for restoring fundamental freedoms. Madam Speaker, the Northern Territory is a harmonious, multicultural and multi-faith society. Territorians respect one another, we welcome difference, we live side by side with people of every background, every tradition and every belief. And what we do not need are overreaching laws that police people's words and create division where there is none. Territorians don't need the thought police. They don't need their government telling them what jokes they can make or what opinions they can hold. That is something I don't think the Labor opposition understand. They clearly haven't learnt their lesson from last year's election. They said they'd honour and respect what Territorians voted for. Well, Leader of the Opposition, you can start now because you've wasted a year already. Madam Speaker, this bill restores balance, it restores freedom and it restores respect for Territorians' right to live, speak and believe without unnecessary government intrusion. On this side of the House, we believe in freedom of speech. We believe in freedom of religion and we believe in the right of everyday Territorians to make decisions for themselves. Not more government creep. The right of parents to send their children to a school where faith is lived and taught is a freedom that sits at the core of a democratic, tolerant, pluralistic society. It is a freedom worth defending, and today this bill defends it. I commend this bill to the House, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, before we proceed, we have checked with Hansard on the concern raised by the opposition leader that she had been misheard and that she felt that the member for Catherine's insinuation of what she said was disorderly. Hansard have confirmed the Leader of the Opposition did not say the word Nazi. So that was misheard. It has been withdrawn and we can continue on. These things happen. I thought you said something different to what you said too, so it was misheard by more than one of us in the chamber, but we will continue on. Member for Sanderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to make contribution to this bill and to state at the outset that I support this bill. I also wish to preface my remarks by observing that, generally speaking, the commentary on this bill in the lead-up to this debate has been measured and thoughtful. I say reasonably measured because, as always, the conversation has, at times, been countered by extremes of arguments. Madam Speaker, this bill should not have come as a surprise to Territorians. The public campaigning of the CLP in the lead-up to the last election made it abundantly clear that change was needed. Yet, across the nation, we risk becoming caught in the grips of extremes. On one side, there are those who claim that these changes will somehow bring society itself to its knees. On the other, there are those who argue the bill does not go far enough. Governments, however, have a responsibility to find the balance, to get on with the job and to chart a course that reflects both fairness and reason. In considering this bill, I want to acknowledge the many groups and individuals who have provided the feedback. I also wish to reflect on the relevance of these reforms to the portfolios and communities I represent. It is clear from the data published in the Northern Territory Anti-Discrimination Commission's recent annual reports that inquiries and complaints have not shifted markedly over time, with disability, sex and race consistently among the most common basis of complaint. In fact, of 46 vilification complaints since mid-2023, only 3 were accepted by the Commission. The current law sets such a low bar that the Commission is rejecting more than 90% of the complaints under this provision. It is important to note that the government's proposed changes in the 3 key areas of this bill are not expected to alter that data significantly. This is not merely my opinion. To quote directly from the Anti-Discrimination Commission's own fact sheets on this bill, in reference to the vilification provisions under Section 20A, even with the change, the ND still has more progressive vilification laws than much of Australia because it doesn't limit the attributes it applies to. Madam Speaker, it is important to break down the key elements of this bill. The Finocchiaro CLP government is delivering on its election commitment to restore balance to the Anti-Discrimination Act 1992, protecting Territorians from genuine harm while safeguarding freedom of speech, religion, and belief. Territory Labor's 2022 amendments went too far. They blurred the line between unlawful discrimination and ordinary good faith conversation. Our reforms correct that overreach and reaffirm the territory's enduring values, fairness, free expression, and the right to disagree respectfully. As one of the most diverse communities in Australia, the Northern Territory deserves law that protect against real harm while upholding the rights and freedoms of all Territorians, regardless of background, belief, or identity. Specifically, this bill provides for a number of key reforms, replaces terms such as offend, insult, and humiliate with a clearer, high legal threshold focused on serious harm, makes it unlawful to incite hatred, serious contempt, or severe ridicule based on personal attributes such as race, religion, gender identity, or sexuality. Restores the right of religious schools to employ staff who share their values under transparent written policy. Streamlines the complaints process to reduce duplication and enable faster referral to the tribunal. The Attorney General has already outlined the detail of Section 20A of the Act and the intent for it to adopt an incitement model consistent with the approach in most Australian jurisdictions rather than Labor's harm model. Importantly, the new Section 35B reintroduces an exemption for religious educational institutions, allowing them to make employment decisions consistent with their doctrines and beliefs. This exemption allows a school to give preference to staff who share the same religion and permits the establishment of conduct expectations aligned with the faith of that institutions. Importantly, this exemption applies only where a written policy clearly sets out the relevant doctrine. Further, amendments to Division 4 of Part 6 will remove the requirement for the Commissioner to evaluate every complaint where conciliation has failed. Complaints will instead be referred more efficiently to the tribunal, supported by the Commissioner's statement of reasons and relevant materials. In theory, Madam Speaker, this should be welcomed by the Commission. We should realise efficiency improvements in its complaints handling process. In addition to the Anti-Discrimination Commission, these reforms will also benefit religious education institutions and their staff, people of faith, and individuals concerned about overreach into opinion or expression. Madam Speaker, it is important to reflect on the consultation process. We are all aware that the consultation on this bill was led by the Attorney General's office. But I would like to remind members that as early as November 2022, the CLP publicly opposed Labor's amendment, describing them as freedom-destroying and out of step with territory values. We did not remove the vilification clause entirely. We listened to feedback, refined the approach, and introduced a consistent national standard that targets genuine harm. In this respect, there exists a diversity of religious views. Not all opinions are the same. Faith communities do not hold uniform opinions. Through extensive consultation, we heard all perspectives. There have been criticisms leveled at this government that can be debunked quickly. The final provisions represent a balanced middle ground that reflects the values of territory faith-based organizations and schools. Let's not forget, Madam Speaker, that it was this CLP government who took freedom of religion to the election. Faith-based schools were previously forced to employ people whose beliefs did not align with theirs. That was not equality, it was overreach. We are restoring balance as we promised Territorians we would. This is an election commitment achieved. Finally, Madam Speaker, as I described earlier, this bill allows the Anti-Discrimination Commission to remain restorative in nature. We can maintain that approach while strengthening its focus on serious harm. Ultimately, these reforms are about addressing serious harm. That is the standard Territorians expect, and it is the standard bill delivers. Madam Speaker, before closing, I wish to reflect briefly on the commentary made in this chamber in the recent days and reaffirm some key principles of this government. The Restoring the Territory lifestyle strategy sets a clear direction to champion the territory's identity as a vibrant, inclusive, and respectful place to live, work, and raise a family. This government is committed to ensuring the Northern Territory is a safe community that provides genuine equality of opportunity for all. We believe that every Territorian should be treated equally, regardless of race, religion, or gender. Our approach is entirely consistent with the broader objectives of the Gender Equality Action Plan, that all Territorians are safe, respected, and free from violence. We will continue to monitor national policy and expert advice to ensure the Territory's practices remain inclusive, balanced, and strong. The review of both Disability Action Plan and Multicultural Policy of the Northern Territory is already underway to ensure our policies remain responsive, contemporary, and community-driven. So, Madam Speaker, I just wish to add, pick on some of the comments from this chamber earlier as well, about the comments that Senator Price made against people from Indian background. And I said this in this chamber a few months ago about my experience during the election campaign from a senior Labour member during the early voting centre near Casuarina in Waggaman, when, along with my friends who are Australians of Indian descent, and we were standing and doing the roadside waving, and one person who was putting like a Labour t-shirt, what he said to us about like, don't forget who brought you here. This is the attitude that I clearly refuse to take on. And when Senator Price made that statement, she said further about she made it clear what she said, and I don't want to claim or provide any further commentary onto that, but she said she supports targeted migration, and that's what she said. And there was a reference in the context of what it has happened in the previous federal election, and also when it comes to the CLP government's view on the migration, the Chief Minister and Minister Kerle made it clear on multiple occasions that we are asking the federal government to increase the lift or cap on the numbers, that we can have more skilled migrants to the territory and to support the shortage of the skilled workforce that we have. So I just want to make it clear. And Senator Price is the senator for the Northern Territory representing, and she's also a member of the Country Liberal Party. So I support her, and I would call her as a sister, older sister. And when she stands with a decision, with a value, with a conviction, it is my responsibility, I believe, to support her. And I did, and I will do in future as well. And I can say, after this occasion, I had met her 3 times in the last couple of months, and it is all on public, because even the reference made by a member for Arafura that he had seen a photograph, which I put it on my Facebook. So this is information that I am providing out, and I always say to the members of the opposition, rather than tracking us down through the Facebook posts, come and engage with the community when we are out and about as well, because we are not seeing you guys out there. We are attending all these different events, engaging with the multicultural community, engaging with the religious group, engaging with the schools. We are not seeing many people out there. Probably I may see one member from the opposition once a month or so, and that's it. So probably if you try to engage more with the people in Northern Territory, you may get the feedback as well. That's consistent feedback that we are getting from the community. Please go ahead with the job, and we want the territory to be on a better track. And in closing, I just want to say that this bill delivers on what we said we would do. It demonstrates action, certainty, and balance, protecting freedoms while upholding fairness for all Territorians. I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Attorney General, in closing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank all of the members who made their contributions tonight, right across the chamber. And I do understand that there's a lot of passion and a lot of feelings in a debate like this, and I certainly remember that back in 2022 when we were debating the amendments back then that Labor had brought forward. Madam Speaker, at the end of the day, this bill is in direct alignment to our election commitments. And this bill amends the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1992 to achieve three key objectives: to ensure freedom of speech, especially for individuals and religious communities to be protected, without allowing condoning hate speech; to restore an exemption for religious schools, recognising their right to employ staff who share their beliefs and uphold the religious character of their schools; and to remove the requirement for the Commissioner to evaluate complaints where dispute resolution has not been successful. Madam Speaker, this bill does not remove protections under the Anti-Discrimination Act. Instead, it retains protections as a safeguard for communities from hate speech and discrimination. And I think what the member for Sanderson said about not all communities are the same was really compelling, because that is the truth. We are not all the same. And so, of course, being out in the community over the last 12 months and hearing from them that they wanted to be sure that they still had those protections against vilification, which is why we kept them in there. We made sure they were there. So I move on to that very first important amendment, which is the Section 20A, which deals with vilification. This bill removes the words offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate from what counts as unlawful conduct. Instead, we replace these with conduct that incites hatred, serious contempt or severe ridicule of a person or group based on a protected attribute. What this means is the law now focuses on incitement rather than just harm. This is not about giving anyone permission to be cruel or demeaning, but about making sure our laws don't capture everyday disagreements or public debate, especially in areas like religion, culture and social policy. Our change moves to an incitement model which focuses on prevention, stopping conduct that could lead to hatred or serious contempt before it escalates. This amendment responds to concerns of Territorians that the model that was brought in by Labor in 2022 that limited freedom of speech. It's argued that the enticement-based protection is better understood by the community. Our provision makes clear that freedom of speech is limited only when conduct such as hate speech is capable of inciting hatred, serious contempt or severe ridicule of a person or a group with a protected attribute. Madam Speaker, our changes to Section 20A bring the Northern Territory in line with most other Australian jurisdictions, including the ACT, New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania, that all use an incitement model for their anti-discrimination laws. Madam Speaker, I also want to highlight that Section 20, which lists out all of the different attributes for discrimination, remains exactly the same as what Labor introduced in 2022. That has not been touched. Madam Speaker, the second key reform is the introduction of Section 35B, which reinstates an exemption for religious schools regarding employment. Madam Speaker, you'll recall that in 2022, the Labor government back then removed the previous religious protections under Section 37A. In doing so, they took a position that challenged the freedom of religion for faith-based schools and communities. The religious exemption recognises religion as a protected attribute and understands that the right of freedom of thought, conscience and religion can sometimes intersect with other fundamental rights, like the right to non-discrimination and equality. Where these rights intersect, a balance must be struck to preserve both as much as possible. And that is exactly what this exemption aims to do. And it is what we promised Territorians at the election that we would do. And you may remember the rally that was held outside Parliament House of the week that the Labor pushed through those laws. And that was in a lot of other lead up with religious groups and parents and families of Territorians coming together to basically say they weren't happy with this removal of this exemption. Religious schools play an important role in our education system here in the Northern Territory and across Australia. They provide families with choice and offer education aligned with their faith and values. This amendment allows religious schools to prefer hiring people of the same religion and to make employment decisions where a potential employee's beliefs or conduct conflict with the doctrines or beliefs of the school faith. And Madam Speaker, I just want to pick up, the member for Arafura asked some questions about, some of the schools in his community and how he was very concerned that teachers wouldn't be able to be employed out in his communities with these changes. And I just want to clarify for the record that schools can still employ whoever they want, even with this change. And in many communities and in many places across the Northern Territory, they do in fact employ everybody and whoever they want. This doesn't change that. It doesn't say that you can't employ someone unless they are of that religion. It just says there's an exemption, and that's for them to follow. And there was also a question about the fears of how it's going to impact the students in the community as well. Member for Arafura brought up. And those changes to nothing has been talked about with students in this change. So students can still go to whichever school their families enrol them into. Madam Speaker, Section 35B also lets schools set conduct expectations for current employees relating to upholding the religious ethos of the institution. To be clear, this exemption is not a blanket licence to discriminate. It is designed to allow religious schools to maintain their identity and character in line with the expectations of their school community and religious bodies. For a religious school to rely on this exemption, they must act on the grounds of religious belief or activity in good faith to avoid offending the religious sensitivities of a reasonable person of that faith, and have these policies clearly set out in writing, available to current and future staff. Madam Speaker, Section 35B coexists with the other exemptions available under the Act, such as Section 35. These can be relied on together as they are not mutually exclusive and can operate concurrently. These are all reasonable and clear requirements that strike a fair balance between religious freedom and the right to non-discrimination and equality. Maintaining this balance between fundamental rights is crucial and makes for good law. Some religious groups asked us to go further, Madam Speaker. They wanted to broaden the exemption beyond what we promised. For example, some of the requests were to extend conduct expectations into the private lives of staff and apply the exemption to the student enrolment. However, extending the exemption into private lives and allowing discrimination in student enrolment would not have been the approach that we wanted in restoring religious freedoms, and it was beyond what was promised at the election. On the other hand, Madam Speaker, some non-religious community groups strongly opposed restoring the exemption at all, but religious schools have the right to preserve their faith-based teaching. In balancing these differing views, we have taken a middle ground approach, respecting the rights of faith-based schools while limiting impacts on other rights. Importantly, religious protections are consistent with other similar exemptions in other Australian jurisdictions and recognise the unique place faith-based schools hold in our society. Madam Speaker, this bill represents a careful and considered approach to balancing competing rights and responsibilities. And like I said, more importantly, it was an election commitment. We recognise that our laws must respect freedom of religion, freedom of speech and freedom from discrimination, while also acknowledging the legitimate role religious communities play in public life. I want to thank everyone who contributed. This bill, really, when I think about this bill and when I'm talking in this House, is really for the parents and the families of Territorians. They have faith leaders and they have other people who might represent them out there in the community. But at the end of the day, they want the choice to be able to send their kids to a school of a faith group which is in line with a faith they may have at home. And that's why I am putting this forward. to make sure that those parents have that choice to send their children to a school, but also to retain that vilification in the Act. Remember, we promised that we were going to repeal it, but when we were out in the community, we realised that there was still a strong desire by the community to have vilification protections in place in the law. And so we've retained that. We've changed the model from the harm model to incitement model. And I am really grateful to everyone who's participated tonight, and of course to everyone who shared their feedback with me and the other members of the Parliament as well. Thank you, and I commend the bill to the House.